Come and sit with me now, here at the very edge of the evening, where the day is loosening its hold and the light is going soft and blue over the water, and there is nothing at all that you need to do except be here, and breathe, and slowly let go. It is the last blue hour along the Nile, that long, gentle stretch between the gold of the afternoon and the deep dark of the night, when the heat lifts off the black fields and the river turns the colour of pale slate, and everything grows quiet and unhurried, the way things do at the end of a long warm day. And there, in the doorway of a little house made of reeds and river mud, someone has set a small oil lamp, a shallow clay dish with a single floating wick, and the flame stands up straight and steady in the still air, small and warm and golden, and it will burn there all through the night. That is our lamp. That is where we begin, and where, many hours from now, we will end. There is no hurry at all. So before we go anywhere, before we walk down into all those years, let us set the day down. Let us do it slowly, together, in 3 easy breaths, and there is no wrong way to do this. Breathe in gently through the nose, and let the breath fill you as far as it wants to go, and then let it out, long and slow, like the river itself breathing out toward the sea. And as you do, let your shoulders come down away from your ears, let them soften and settle, let them stop holding the day up. That is 1. Now breathe in again, slow and easy, and as you let this one go, let your jaw unclench, let your face grow loose and heavy and kind, let the little frown between your brows smooth itself away, for there is nothing left tonight that needs your worrying. That is 2. And once more, breathe in, quietly, and this time as you breathe out, let your whole body grow heavy. Let your weight sink down into the bed, into the pillow, into whatever is holding you. Let it hold you completely, so that you do not have to hold yourself at all. That is 3. And there you are. The day is set down now, out at the water's edge, and we will not pick it up again tonight. And here is a small thing you might do, if you are still awake and it pleases you, a small and gentle ritual before we begin our journey down the river of years. If you would like to, you might leave a mark below, just a word or 2, telling me where in the wide world you are listening from tonight, from what city, from what quiet room, from beside what window, with the dark pressing softly against the glass. And when you do, it is as though you too are setting a small lamp in a doorway, a little warm light out across the enormous dark, so that all of us listening, wherever we are, become a long scattered line of lamps burning through the same night, keeping one another gentle company while the world sleeps. You do not have to. But it is a kind thing to light a lamp for the others, and to know that theirs are burning too. And if, somewhere in the middle of all this, you simply drift off and never read a word more, then that is the whole and entire point, and I will be glad for you, and the lamp will keep burning just the same. Now let me tell you, softly, the shape of the night ahead, so that you know the country we are going to wander through, and so that you can let it all wash gently over you without needing to hold on to any single part of it. We are going to walk, very slowly, down the whole long river of one of the oldest stories the world has ever kept, the story of ancient Egypt, from its very beginning to its very end, and it is a story so long that it barely seems to move, the way a great river barely seems to move when you stand and watch it. We will begin tonight at the river itself, and the black land it makes, and the joining of 2 lands into one, and the first quiet scratching of writing by lamplight, and then, in the hours to come, we will drift on to the age of the pyramid builders, the god-kings and the great stones rising at Giza, and to the calm ordinary days along the water, the farmer and the potter, and the idea they called ma'at, the balance of things, weighed against a single feather. We will hear the gentle bedtime tale of Osiris and Isis and their son, and the green shoot of returning. We will wander into the great southern city of Thebes and the stone forest of Karnak, and meet a queen who ruled as a king. We will walk into the hidden valley where the pharaohs laid themselves down to sleep, and into a sun-worshipping city built on empty ground and then quietly given back to the sand, and past a boy king sleeping untouched in the dark. We will sit with the great builder Ramesses beneath his 4 giant statues, and drift through the long evening when Egypt grew so old it became the whole world's memory of itself. We will come at last to a shining city by the sea, with its great library and its tall lighthouse, and to the very last of the pharaohs, a queen who loved the ancient land. And then we will watch the writing fall silent, and the patient desert keep everything safe in the dark for a very long time, until at last the old signs are read again and everything is given gently back. That is the whole shape of it, and there is not the slightest need to remember any of that now. Just let it be a promise of the country ahead, and let us begin. So, the Nile. Everything in this whole long story begins with the river, and so we will begin there too. Picture, if you like, a single thread of water starting far, far to the south, deep in the warm heart of Africa, and running north, always north, which is a strange and lovely thing about this river, that it flows upward on the map, out of the green lakes and highlands and down across a vast dry country toward the sea. And for most of its long journey it runs through desert, through a land that would be nothing but sand and bare stone and blinding sun, a place where almost nothing could live, except that the river carries life straight through the middle of it, a long green ribbon laid across the dry world, narrow as a road in the south and spreading wide at the end. The whole of Egypt is really just the 2 edges of this river, the thin band of living green on either side of the water, and beyond that green, quite suddenly, the desert begins and the world goes empty. And the people who lived here understood that with perfect clearness. They knew they were the children of the river, and that without it there would be nothing at all. And once a year, every year, the river did the most wonderful thing, the thing their whole world turned upon, and they called it the inundation. Far to the south, out of sight, the summer rains would swell the river until it rose and spilled quietly over its banks, and spread out slow and brown across the flat land on either side, and lay there for weeks, patient and shining, a wide, calm sheet of water under the summer sky. And there was no terror in it for them, for it came gently and it came on time, and they had learned its ways over thousands of years. And when at last the water sank back down into its channel and went on toward the sea, it left behind, over all the drowned fields, a fresh new layer of dark rich mud, soft black silt carried down from the far highlands, the most fertile soil in all the world, spread free across the land every single year. And into that black earth they pressed their seed, and it grew, and it fed them again the next year, and the next, for age upon age upon age. The river gave, and the people lived, and there was no hurry, because the river would give again. And so they had a name for their country, and it was not a grand name, it was simply true and simply loved. They called their land Kemet, which means the black land, the good dark earth left behind by the flood, the living soil where everything grew. And all around the black land lay the other country, the desert, the endless red waste of sand and stone that ringed them on both sides, and that they called Deshret, the red land. And you could stand, they said, with 1 foot in each. 1 foot on the black soil, where the barley rose green and the cattle grazed, and 1 foot on the red sand where nothing grew and the dead were kept. And the line between them was as sharp as the edge of a blade, black and then red, life and then the still dry hush beyond. And along the water grew the reeds and the tall papyrus, that strange and useful plant with its feathery green crown, standing in soft thickets at the river's edge, out of which they made their boats and their mats and their baskets, and, one day, the smooth pale sheets they would learn to write upon. The black land, the red land, the river between, and the reeds whispering along the shore. That is the country. That is the whole stage of our long story, and it will hardly change at all across all the thousands of years to come. Now in the very early days, before the story truly gathers itself together, this long green land was not yet one land at all, but 2. and it will help you to hold this gently in your mind, though there is no need to grip it. In the south, upstream, there was the long, narrow valley, the thin green thread of river winding between the desert cliffs, and this was called Upper Egypt. Upper because it lay higher up the river toward the source, and its kings wore a tall white crown. And in the north, downstream, where the river at last opened its hand and spread into many branches across a wide green marshy fan of land before pouring into the sea, there lay the delta, the broad wetland of the north, and this was called Lower Egypt. Lower because it lay lower down toward the river's mouth, and its rulers wore a broad red crown. Two lands then, the narrow valley and the spreading delta, the white crown and the red, each with its own ways, sharing the one great river that ran through both, like a single long cord binding them loosely together. And then, a very long time ago, more than 3,000 years before the counting of our own years even began, so far back that it makes the mind grow soft and quiet just to reach for it, there came a king out of the south who joined the two lands into one. His name was Narmer, and he is also remembered by another name, Menes, and the two names may belong to one man, and it does not matter to us tonight which we use, for either way he is the one who bound the two lands together. He came down the river from the south, and under him the narrow valley and the wide delta were made into a single kingdom, and the white crown and the red crown were fitted one inside the other into a single tall double crown, so that ever after the pharaoh would wear both lands upon his head at once. And there is a very old carved stone that remembers this joining, and on it he wears the two crowns, and it is one of the first pages, if you like, of the longest book in the world. And Narmer, or Menes, needed a place from which to hold his two lands together, a still centre at the meeting point of the valley and the delta, right where the narrow south opens out into the broad north. And so he founded a city there, and its name was Memphis, and its oldest name meant something like the White Walls, a bright-walled city standing at the hinge of the kingdom, watching over both lands at once. And for a very long time, Memphis would be the heart of Egypt, the place the kings ruled from, the white-walled city by the river, where the two lands were held gently in one hand. There is no need to hold the name, let it simply settle, the White Walls, at the meeting of the north and the south. And it was in these early days, as the kingdom drew itself together, that something quiet and enormous was born, something that would let this whole long story survive to reach us at all, and it was writing. For the people of the river found that they could draw small pictures, a bird, a reed, a foot, an eye, a little rippling line for water, and set them in rows, and make them stand for words and for sounds, and so keep a thought outside the head, and send it down the river, and hold it fast against forgetting. And these picture signs they carved carefully into stone for the things meant to last, and we call them hieroglyphs, which means the sacred carvings, and they are beautiful, small and exact, and alive, a whole marsh of little creatures and plants and hands and stars marching in patient rows. And for the ordinary business of every day, they wrote a quicker, softer, flowing hand, with a reed pen dipped in ink, upon smooth pale sheets pressed and dried from the papyrus reed. And the people who could do this, who held the reed and knew the signs, were the scribes. And they were quietly honoured all their lives, for they held the memory of the whole land in their patient hands. And so let us end tonight just there, with one of them. Picture a scribe, in one of these earliest days, sitting cross-legged in the doorway of a reed and mud house, at the edge of the river, with the last blue hour going soft around him, and a little oil lamp set beside him with its single floating wick burning steady and gold, the very same small flame we began with. And on his knees he has a smooth sheet of pale papyrus, and in his hand a slender reed pen. And he dips it, and he leans close in the warm little circle of the lamplight, and slowly, carefully, with great and unhurried attention, he presses the first of the sacred signs onto the page, a bird, a reed, a rippling line of water, keeping some small true thing safe against all the long years to come, years that will one day carry that page, and that river, and that steady little flame, all the way down to us. Here tonight, the river runs on past him in the dark, breathing out slowly toward the sea, patient and unhurried. Exactly where we will find it in the morning, and the lamp burns on in the doorway, and there is nothing you need to carry from any of this. Let your shoulders be heavy, and your breath be slow, and let it all drift softly away into the dark, for the writing is only just beginning, and the pyramids are still far off, and there is not the slightest need to reach for any of it now. Rest now, let it go. The river is here, and so are you, and there is no hurry at all. And so we leave the scribe there in his little pool of lamplight, his reed pen resting, the first sacred signs drying on the papyrus by the river. And we let the years carry us forward, slow and patient, the way the Nile itself carries a reed downstream, not hurrying, not straining, simply drifting on the wide brown water toward whatever comes next. And what comes next is a great and settled quiet, a long golden morning of the world that we call the Old Kingdom. And there is no need to hold anything tightly as we go, no need to remember the names that came before, for the river runs on exactly where we left it. And the black fields are still black, and the red desert still lies out beyond them under the enormous sky, and everything is very calm. In this long morning the land has grown sure of itself, gathered under one hand, one crown, the white and the red bound together into the double crown, and at the head of it all stands the Pharaoh, and I want you to picture him not as a distant, frightening figure, but as something the people of Kemet found deeply comforting, for they did not think of their king as merely a powerful man. They thought of him as a living god walking among them, the living Horus, the falcon god come down in human form, and the son of the great sun god Ra, whose golden disk climbed each dawn out of the eastern desert and sailed all day across the sky and sank each dusk into the west. And so long as the Pharaoh sat upon his throne, the sun would rise, and the flood would come, and the order of the world would hold, and the balance would be kept, and there was, in that belief, a very great restfulness. The restfulness of a child who knows that someone older and wiser is keeping the whole house safe through the night, so that the child need not keep it, and may simply sleep. And it was in this settled morning of the world that a man appeared whose name we still keep. All these thousands of years later, a man named Imhotep, and I love to say his name softly, because he is the very first architect in all of human memory whose name has come down to us, the first builder we can call by name. And before him the kings of Egypt had been laid to rest under low flat rectangles, of mud-brick humble mounds pressed close to the earth. But Imhotep, serving a king named Djoser, had a quieter and grander idea, and at a place called Saqqara, on the desert edge above the river, he set one great stone platform upon the ground, and then a slightly smaller one upon that, and a smaller one upon that, and another, and another. 6 broad steps of pale stone, climbing one upon the next into the desert air, until there stood the very first pyramid the world had ever seen, the Step Pyramid, rising like a great stone stairway toward the sun, and it was the first time in all the story of people that anyone had piled stones so high. And yet there is nothing frantic in it, nothing of struggle, only patience laid upon patience. One careful layer resting on the last, the way sleep comes, one slow breath resting upon the breath before it. And the steps were not only steps, they were a stairway with a meaning, a stairway by which the spirit of the king might climb, gently and without effort, up out of the black land and into the sky to join Ra among the imperishable stars that wheel forever and never set. And so from its very beginning the pyramid was a kind of quiet promise, a promise that the end of a life was not a falling but a rising, not a going out but a going up, and the people who looked upon that pale stairway in the desert must have felt something settle in their chests, some old worry laid down, and we can let it be laid down in us too, here in the dark, for there is nothing here that we need to carry, and there is no hurry at all. And once the first stairway had been raised, others followed, for the idea, once dreamed, could not be undone, and the builders learned and learnt again, filling in the steps, smoothing the sides, until the shape we all know so well came at last into being, the true pyramid. Its 4 faces climbing to a single point far overhead, and the greatest of them all rose a little way downriver from Saqqara, at a place on the desert plateau called Giza, where 3 of them stand together to this very night, and the first and largest was raised for a king named Khufu. And it is so vast that even now, after all the centuries, it is difficult to hold its size in the mind. A mountain made by hands, more than 2 million blocks of stone set one beside the other and one upon the other, each block heavy beyond easy imagining. And yet I want you to notice how quiet that fact becomes when we lay it down gently. For the wonder of it is not a loud wonder, it is the slow wonder of enormous patience, of a thing done a little at a time over many long and sunlit years. And beside Khufu's mountain stands a second, raised for his son Khafre, which looks even taller because it sits on higher ground and still wears a little cap of its smooth white casing near the very top, catching the light. And beside those 2 stands a third and smaller pyramid, raised for Menkori, gentler in scale, as though the great song were softening toward its close. 3 pyramids together on the golden plateau, 3 stone stairways toward Ra, and near them, carved from a single long ridge of living rock, lies the great Sphinx, a vast calm creature with the body of a lion at rest and the face of a king, gazing east across the sands toward the place where the sun comes up, keeping its patient watch over the river and the fields. Its great paws stretched out before it, and it has been lying there, unhurried, gazing at each new sunrise, for longer than almost anything else that human hands have made, and it is lying there still. Now I want to be careful and tender with an old idea, because for a long time people told a harsh story about how these great things were made, a story of whips and cruelty and endless suffering slaves, but that story is not the true one, and the truth is far kinder and far more restful, for the pyramids were not built by armies of the enslaved. They were built by ordinary Egyptians, by farmers, by the very people who worked the black fields along the river, and they came to build in the season when the river gave them the gift of time. For each year, you remember, the Nile rose in its great slow inundation and spread out across the fields and covered the black land in shining water, and in those flood weeks there was no ploughing to be done, and no sowing, and no reaping. And so the farmers, who would otherwise have sat idle by the water, came instead in great organised crews to help raise the king's stairway to the sky, and they were fed and they were sheltered, and they were given bread and beer and cared for. And when one of them was hurt, his broken bone was set and healed, for we have found their very bodies and their mended bones. And we have found the names they gave their work gangs, cheerful, proud names, calling themselves the Friends of Khufu, the Drunkards of Menkori, teasing names, the names of people who took a rough good humour in what they did together. And there was a great and gentle care taken in the placing of them, too, for the builders did not simply pile the stones any way at all, but laid the base of each pyramid so level and so true that even now, after all the ages, one corner stands scarcely a hair's breadth higher than another, and they set the 4 sides to face the 4 quarters of the world, one toward the rising sun and one toward its setting, one toward the warm south from which the river comes, and one toward the cool north toward which it flows and toward the star around which all the other stars turn in the night. And to do this they watched the sky with great patience, marking where a star rose and where it set, and finding the true north between. And there is something wonderfully calming in that, in the thought of quiet men standing in the cool dark before dawn, in no hurry at all, simply watching the slow wheel of the stars and taking their bearings from the steady heavens, so that a mountain of stone might be set square with the whole turning sky. And picture how the great stones came to Giza, for here again the river was the gentle secret of it all, for when the flood lay wide across the land, the water crept close to the desert edge, close to the foot of the plateau. And so the enormous blocks of fine white stone, quarried upriver and across the water, were floated down on broad barges upon the very back of the flood, the Nile itself becoming the road, the Nile itself carrying the mountains to the place where the mountains would be built. And so you must not imagine the building as a frenzy of straining and pain, but rather as a long, unhurried rhythm tied to the breathing of the river, the water rising and the stones arriving and the crews gathering, the water falling and the farmers going home again to their fields. Year upon year upon year, the great shape climbing a little higher each season, patient and unhurried, until the capstone was set at last upon the summit, and the whole vast face was smoothed and polished until it shone. For the finished pyramids did not look then as they look now, weathered and bare and the colour of the desert, no. When they were new, each one was sheathed in casing stones of fine white limestone, polished smooth as still water, so that the whole enormous shape blazed under the Egyptian sun like a thing made of light itself, a great white flame standing on the edge of the desert, visible far off across the fields, and the Egyptians had a lovely thought about that shape, for they said the slanting sides were the sun's own rays made solid. The beams that you can sometimes see leaning down out of a break in the clouds, made into stone and set upon the earth, a ramp of sunlight down which the god might descend, and up which the king might climb, and so the whole mountain of stone was really a single quiet idea about light, about rising, about going gently home to the sun. And deep within each of these bright mountains, hidden far inside the enormous weight of stone, there lay a small and quiet chamber, a still room made ready to keep the king safe on his long gentle journey up toward Ra, and around it ran narrow passages sloping up and down through the dark, and when all was finished the ways were closed and the great door was sealed. And the chamber was left to its perfect silence, a silence deeper than any we ever know, cool and dark and utterly at peace in the very heart of the mountain, and there it would rest, undisturbed and unhurried, through all the long slow centuries to come, and we need not go in there now, we need only know that it is there, quietly kept, far off in the middle of all that stone, and there is not the slightest need to reach for it, for we will come back, in our own good time, to the keeping of such quiet rooms many ages from tonight. And I want you to feel how untroubled all of this is now, for whatever effort and sweat and long years went into the raising of them, that is all finished, that was finished thousands and thousands of years ago, and every hand that lifted a stone has been at rest for longer than we can hold in the mind, and the work is simply done, complete, standing, and needs nothing more from anyone, and there is a deep peace in a thing that is wholly finished, a thing that asks nothing further of you, that you may simply look upon and let be, the way you might look upon a mountain, or the sea, or the face of someone sleeping, with no task in it at all. So let us stand a little while at the foot of them, you and I, in the cool of the desert night, for the sun has gone down now behind the western hills, and the last blue hour has deepened into true dark, and the sand that was so hot underfoot by day has given up its warmth to the sky and turned soft and cool. And the three great pyramids rise above us against the stars, enormous and silent, their pale sides catching the faint silver of the starlight, and beyond them the Sphinx lies gazing eastward, waiting with endless patience for a dawn that is still many hours away, and there is not the slightest need to reach for that dawn now. It is far off, and it will come exactly when it comes, without any help from us at all. And overhead the sky is thick and deep with stars, more stars than you could ever count, the whole slow wheel of them turning above the desert, as it has turned above these stones for 5,000 years, the imperishable ones that never set, and the river lies out there in the dark below, breathing quietly toward the sea, slow and patient, carrying its faint gleam of starlight down toward the delta and the waiting sea, and the black fields sleep, and the little reed and mud houses sleep, and the lamp still burns low and steady in its far-off doorway at the edge of the water, its small floating wick untroubled, and everything is very calm, and very old, and perfectly at rest. So let the great stairways stand there in the dark just as they have always stood, needing nothing, keeping their long silence under the turning stars, and let your own breath grow as slow and easy as the rivers, in and out, unhurried. And if your eyes have grown heavy, if the dark behind them has begun to soften and blur, then let them close, and let the pyramids and the Sphinx and the wide starry desert all drift softly away, for they are safe, and they will keep, and the river runs on exactly where we left it, and there is nothing at all that you need to do now but rest. And breathe. And drift, here in the quiet, while the land of the river sleeps on beneath the enormous and patient sky. And now let us come down, very softly, from the great height of the pyramids, down out of the wide desert wind and the enormous stars, down the long stone ray of the tomb and along the sloping causeway, until our feet are once more on the black earth by the water, where the ordinary days are kept. For the pyramids are only the tall stone edge of this world, the part that reaches up toward Ra, and underneath them, all around them, spread out flat and green along the river, lies the gentle country where the living lived. And it is into that green country we are drifting now, without any hurry at all, the way a leaf comes down from a high branch and turns over once, and settles on the slow brown water, and is carried on. There is no need to hold on to the pyramids. They will stand exactly where we left them all through the night, patient and unhurried, and we can walk out into the fields now and let the great tombs grow small behind us. Here, along the river, the day begins before the sun does, in that first grey coolness when the water is still the colour of pewter and the mist lies low over the reeds, and already the land is quietly waking, not with any clamour but with small soft sounds, a bird stirring in the papyrus, a door of woven reeds pushed gently open, a jar being set down on a stone. And I want us to walk through one of these ordinary days together, one single Old Kingdom day among the countless thousands that the river gave, because it is in these small days, far more than in the great monuments, that the real warmth of this old land is kept, and there is nothing here to trouble you, only the quiet round of good work done well and set down again when the light goes. But before we walk, let us hold in our hands the one idea that held all of these days together, the calm idea at the very centre of Egyptian life, the idea called Ma'at. It is a soft word, Ma'at, and it means many gentle things at once. It means order, the good order of the world, the river rising and falling in its season, the sun going up and coming down, the fields flooding and drying and greening again. It means balance, the even weighing of things, nothing too much and nothing too little. It means truth, and it means justice, and it means the simple rightness of a life lived kindly and honestly among your neighbours. And all of this whole vast calm idea, they pictured not as some heavy law carved in stone, but as something almost weightless, as a single feather, one soft upright feather standing straight and still, and that feather was worn by the goddess Ma'at herself, who was order and truth made gentle, and the feather was her sign, and it is a lovely thing, I think, that a whole civilization chose to picture the deepest rightness of the world, not as a sword or a fist, but as a feather, light enough to float, and asked only that a life be light enough to balance against it. For they believed, in the quietest and most comforting way, that at the end of a long life the heart would be laid in one pan of a great balance, and in the other pan would rest that single feather of Ma'at, and the heart would be weighed against it, gently, without cruelty, only to see if the life had been lived in balance, if it had been kind and true, and unheavy with wrong. And a good heart, a heart that had loved its family and dealt fairly and spoken no great lies, such a heart was light as the feather, and the two pans hung level and even, and all was well, and the person passed on into the peaceful fields beyond. We will not linger long on that weighing, for it is far off, and there is not the slightest need to reach for it now. I tell you of it only so that you can feel, as we walk through the ordinary day, how every small honest thing that the people did, every fair measure of grain, and every kind word, was quietly adding to the lightness of a heart, and how gently the whole of life was held. So now the sun comes up over the eastern desert, and the pewter river turns to silver and then to soft gold, and the black fields breathe out their coolness, and the day begins. And here first is the farmer, out at the water's edge in the low light, and he is lifting water from the river up onto his land with the simplest and most patient of machines, the shadoof, which is only a long pole balanced across an upright post, with a bucket hung at one end and a heavy lump of dried mud at the other. And he leans on the pole and dips the bucket down into the river, and it fills and grows heavy, and then he lets the weight at the far end do the work, and the bucket rises, slow and smooth, and he swings it round and tips the water into the little channel that runs off between his rows, and the water goes chuckling away into the dark soil to find the roots of the barley and the onions and the beans. And he does this again and again, dip and lift and swing and pour, in a slow, unhurried rhythm as old as the river itself, and there is a great restfulness in watching him, in the creak of the pole and the small splash and the silver water sliding away into the green, and the barley standing tall behind him in the level morning light. And a little way along the bank, under a roof of woven reeds, sits the potter at his wheel, and his hands are wet and brown with the good river clay, for that is the river's other gift. Not only the black earth for the grain, but the smooth clay for the making of jars. And he turns his wheel with a patient foot, and the clay rises up under his hands, wet and gleaming, and he draws it gently upward and opens it and shapes it, and a jar grows out of the spinning clay the way a plant grows, and when it is done he lifts it away and sets it in the sun to dry. One more jar among rows of drying jars, jars for water, jars for grain, jars for the beer that everyone will drink at the day's end. And there is nothing hurried in his hands, only the long-learned ease of a craft done 10,000 times, and the wheel turns, and the clay rises, and the morning warms. And out on the water itself, low and quiet among the tall reeds, is the fisherman on his little skiff, and the skiff is not carved from precious wood, but bound together out of bundles of papyrus reeds, light as a basket, riding high on the slow brown water. And he poles himself softly along the edge of the marsh where the fish gather in the cool green shade. And he sets his net or lowers his line, and he waits, patient and unhurried, while the water birds step among the lotus, and the dragonflies hang in the warm air, and now and then a fish is drawn up silver and flashing, and laid in the bottom of the skiff, and then he waits again. And the whole marsh is a soft green murmur around him, the reeds leaning and whispering, the light coming down in long ribbons through the papyrus tops. And he drifts there in the middle of the morning, as though there were all the time in the world, because along this river there was, and back on the bank, near the little cluster of reed and mud houses, the baker and the brewer are at their gentle work, and truly the two are almost one, for the bread and the beer of Egypt came from the same good grain, and belonged to the same warm round of the day. And the baker grinds the barley and the emmer wheat into flour, and works it into dough, and shapes it into thick round loaves, and bakes them in the ashes, and in tall clay moulds set close to the fire. And the smell of the baking bread drifts out over the yard, that oldest and most comforting of all smells. And the brewer takes some of the bread, lightly baked, and crumbles it into water in the big jars, and lets it stand and quietly work in the warmth until it becomes a thick, mild, nourishing beer, cloudy and sweet, not strong, a food as much as a drink, and this is what the farmer and the potter and the fisherman will all sit down to when the sun goes low. A round loaf and a jar of soft beer, the plain good supper of the black land. And there is one more figure in our ordinary day, sitting a little apart in the shade with his legs crossed and a board across his lap, and he is the scribe, and he is quietly the most fortunate man in all the village. For he need not lift the shaduf in the sun, or wet his hands in the clay, he need only sit and write. And across his knees he has smoothed a sheet of papyrus, made from that same tall marsh reed, its inner pith cut into strips and laid crosswise, and pressed and dried into a smooth pale page, and beside him he has his little palette with 2 cakes of ink, black and red, and his slim reed pen. And he dips the pen and he writes, softly, the small careful signs, counting the sacks of grain as they come in from the harvest, listing the cattle, recording the measure of the fields, keeping the quiet accounts by which the whole gentle order of the land was held together. For this was Mart too, in its plainest and most daily form, the fair count, the honest record, the grain measured out true, and the scribe with his reed pen was one of its quietest keepers, and his signs went down onto the papyrus in long even lines. And the day's small truths were saved. And here is the tenderest thing of all, and the reason we can walk through this ancient day at all so many thousands of years later, as though we were there. For all of these small ordinary doings, the farmer at his shadoof, and the potter at his wheel, and the fisherman among the reeds, and the baker at his oven, and the scribe at his board, all of them were painted in bright and loving colour on the walls of the tombs. The people who could afford a fine tomb did not fill its walls with battles or terrors, but with exactly these gentle scenes of everyday life, the sowing and the reaping, the fishing and the fowling, the baking and the brewing, the cattle wading across a ford, a girl carrying a basket of figs, a man netting birds in the marsh, a servant pouring beer, so that all of it might go on with them, forever, into the peaceful fields beyond. And because they painted these things, and because the dry desert air kept the colours soft and whole, we can stand today in those quiet painted rooms and see an Egyptian farmer of 5,000 years ago smiling at his oxen, and see the very fish in the very net, and it is as though the ordinary day was gently lifted out of time and held, and handed forward, all the way to us. Tonight, the tomb paintings kept the small days safe, the way the sand kept everything safe. And there is something very peaceful in that thought, that the plainest and most passing things, the pouring of the beer and the lifting of the water, were the very things they wished to keep forever. So that is the ordinary day, and now let the sun go down on it. Let the farmer lean his shadoof still and walk home along the dyke with the last gold light on his back, and let the potter cover his wheel, and let the fisherman pole his papyrus, skiff into the bank and step out onto the mud, and let the scribe wash his pen and roll away his papyrus, and let them all gather in the low doorways of the reed and mud houses with a round loaf and a jar of soft beer, while the river turns to rose and then to grey, and the first stars come out over the black fields. The day is being set down at the water's edge, gently, the way it was every evening along this river for age upon age, and there is nothing to keep hold of, and nothing to finish, only the good tiredness of honest work, and the coming of the cool night. And now, as the many quiet evenings gather into years and the years into long slow centuries, something begins to soften and dim, very gently, at the great height of the land, though down here among the fields hardly anyone would have felt it at first. For the old kingdom, the tall bright age of the pyramid builders, had stood for a very long time, and all things that stand for a long time settle at last, the way a fire that has burned high through the evening settles down toward its embers without any alarm. The floods, which were the true wealth of everything, seem to have faltered a little in those far-off years, coming lower than they should, so that the black land was thinner and the harvests smaller. And when there is a little less grain there is a little less to gather at the centre, and the far-off Pharaoh in his white-walled city held the whole land a little more loosely in his hand. And the great lords of the provinces out along the river took up more of the keeping of their own small countries, and the one bright centre softened into many quiet centres. And the building of the enormous pyramids came gently to its close, for such mountains of stone need one strong gathered hand and a full river of grain, and both for a while drew in. But you must not picture this as any kind of falling or breaking, for it was nothing so sharp as that. It was only a dimming, a settling, a long easing of the land into a quieter age, and in between time when the river still rose, a little lower, and the fields still greened, a little thinner, and the farmer still leaned on his shadoof in the morning, and the potter still turned his wheel, and the scribe still counted the grain. For the ordinary days went on almost exactly as they always had, closed down by the water, whatever was loosening far away in the halls of kings. The great single story of Egypt simply rested for a while, and gathered itself, out of sight, the way the land itself rested in the low season and waited for the flood to come back and lift it. And it would come back. The river always came back. But that is for later, far off, and there is not the slightest need to reach for it now. For now there is only the evening, and the day set down at the water's edge, and the loaf and the soft beer in the doorway, and the river breathing out toward the sea, slow and patient, exactly where we left it. Let the great question of kingdoms lie out in the dark. It settled itself thousands of years ago and needs nothing from us tonight. Let your own day, like the farmer's, be lean still and left at the water's edge, the water taking it gently away. There is no hurry. There is no hurry at all. The stars are coming out over the black fields, one and then another, and then a soft uncountable drift of them, and the little lamp burns on in the doorway, and the river runs on, and you may let it all go now. And rest. And drift down toward the quiet in-between country of sleep, where the next stage of the river is waiting, patient and unhurried, to gather us up in the morning. And so we drift a little further down the river of years, the way you might let a small boat slip its rope, and move on the slow brown current without any need to row. And the quiet in-between age we left behind us settles softly into the dark, and the river runs on exactly where we left it, patient and unhurried, breathing out toward the sea. There is no hurry here, none at all. We are only walking, you and I, down the long gallery of the years, and each age we pass hands us gently on to the next, and the next age is waiting for us now, warm and low and easy, and we may come to it as slowly as we like. For a long while, in that soft in-between time, the land of the river had loosened, and no single hand had held it whole, and the great houses of the south and the north had each kept their own small courts and their own quiet fields, and this was not a ruin, and it was not a sorrow, it was only a resting, the way a field rests between one flood and the next, dark and fallow and full of waiting seed. And you need not worry over any of it, for it was all so long ago, and it came right again, the way these things do, the way the water always comes back to the black land when its season turns. And in the far south, at the city of Thebes, where the river runs wide and the cliffs stand golden on the western bank, there rose a king whose name was Mentuhotep, and he gathered the loosened land back into one hand again, gently and firmly, the way you might gather a loose sheaf of reeds and bind them into a single sound bundle, and the two lands were one once more, the white crown and the red crown together, and this new age we have come to is called the Middle Kingdom. Say his name once, softly, and then let it go, the way you might set a smooth stone back on the windowsill. Mentuhotep, there is nothing you need to hold on to. He gathered the river's country back together, and he made his long resting place at the foot of the western cliffs across from Thebes, in terraces of pale stone that stepped up out of the desert toward the rock, and around him the land grew whole and calm and good again. And that is all we need to carry forward. Mentuhotep, who bound the reeds into one bundle. Let the name drift off downstream now. It will be there if we want it. Far off, and there is not the slightest need to reach for it now. And the age that he opened, and that the kings who came after him carried on, was a humane and gentle age. An age people would remember long afterward as a kind of golden and classical time, the way you might remember a particular calm summer of your childhood, softened and warm at the edges. The kings of this Middle Age did not raise the enormous stairways of stone that the old god kings had raised at Giza, for that first towering ambition had settled and cooled. Instead they dug canals, and they drained the marshes of the great green basin they called the Fayum, and they opened the good black land wider so that more people might plant and harvest and be fed, and they sent quiet trading boats up the river into the south and out along the coasts, and they mended the roads and set the granaries in order, and they kept the peace. And the scribes of this age wrote in so clear and so beautiful a hand, and told their stories in language so graceful and so measured, that the scribes of every age that followed would learn to write by copying them, the way a child learns a letter by tracing over a careful one already drawn. It was a settled and a reasonable time, a time of tending and mending rather than of raising and conquering, and there is a great restfulness in that, in a whole age given over simply to the careful keeping of ordinary good things. And it was in this gentle age, more than in any age before it, that people all along the river held close to a certain old and comforting story, a story they had always half known but now took wholly into their hearts, And it is exactly the kind of story that belongs to a night like this one, told low and slow with no fright in it anywhere, only tenderness and a green thing growing. So let me tell it to you now, the tale of Osiris, the way you might have heard it murmured by the doorway of a reed and mud house at the last blue hour, with the lamp burning its small steady flame and the river going by outside in the dark. Long ago, the story says, longer ago even than the god-kings, when the world was young and the gods themselves still walked in the Black Land, there was a good king named Osiris, and he was the kindest and the wisest of all the kings that ever were. And Osiris looked on the people of the river, who in those first days lived rough and knew little, and he loved them, and he taught them. He showed them how to plant the seed in the dark wet silt, and how to gather the golden grain, and how to press the sweet fruit of the vine, and how to bake and to brew, and how to live gently with one another under good and even law, and how to honour the gods with quiet songs. And wherever Osiris went, he carried no weapon and needed none, for he won the people not with fear, but with kindness, with music and with the gift of growing things, and the Black Land flourished under him and was glad. And beside him always was his wife and his sister Isis, who loved him with a whole and steady love, and who was wise in her own right, wise in the old deep gentle arts. And the two of them together were the calm bright centre of the world. Now Osiris had a brother, and the brother's name was Set, and Set belonged to the red desert as Osiris belonged to the black fields, and there grew in Set a restlessness and an envy, the way a shadow gathers in the corner of a warm room. And I will not linger on what Set did, for this is a night for sleeping and not for troubling, and the doing of it is long over, thousands upon thousands of years over, and we will not watch it. It is enough, and more than enough, to say softly that through Set's envy the good King Osiris was taken away from the living world, taken down and away and lost, and the Black Land grieved, and Isis grieved most of all. Let that part lie quiet in the dark. It has been over for a very long time, and here is the tender heart of the tale, the part they held on to all along the river, so listen gently. Isis, in her steady unfailing love, would not let the loss be the end. She went out to search, patient and unhurried, over all the Black Land and along all the winding of the river, and wherever she went she gathered up what was lost and kept it safe, and she did not stop, and she did not despair, and her love was longer and stronger than any shadow. And with the help of the other kind gods she wrapped her lost husband with the greatest care and the greatest tenderness, wrapping him softly the way you would wrap something infinitely precious to keep it safe for a long, long journey. And she breathed the breath of her love over him, and Osiris was not gone after all. He was changed. He did not come back to sit again on a throne in the sunlit world of the living, for that world had turned. Instead he passed on into another country, a still and gentle country beyond the sunset, and there he became a king again, the kindest of kings, the lord of that quiet land where the dead go to rest. And the country he ruled now was not a place of fear at all, but a green and peaceful country, watered by its own soft river, planted with its own tall grain, a place of rest and reunion and calm, unending afternoons. And Osiris sat over it gently, the good king still, welcoming home all who came. And that was the first great comfort of the tale, that beyond the sunset there was not a darkness to dread, but a kind lord, and a green field, and a rest. And there was a second comfort woven in with it, sweeter still, and it is this. Isis, in her long searching and her long tending, was found at last to be carrying a child, and in the quiet of the marshes, hidden among the tall papyrus and the whispering reeds where the water lies still, she bore a son, and she raised him there in secret and in safety, and the child's name was Horus. And Horus grew, sheltered by the reeds and by his mother's love, and grew strong and whole, and when he was grown he took up his father's place in the living world, the rightful gentle heir, so that the good and the kind did not pass out of the world after all, but returned to it, renewed, in the sun. And this was the shape the people loved, the good king who does not truly end but passes into a peaceful country beyond, and the devoted love that will not give up, and the child of the reeds who carries the goodness back into the light. Loss turns softly into keeping, and keeping turns softly into return. And do you see now why they loved it so, and held it so close, all along the Black Land, in this settled and humane age we are walking through? For they looked around themselves every single year, and they saw the very same story told again in the fields, without any words at all. They saw the river rise in the inundation, and cover the land and go down again, and they saw the black earth lie still and seeming empty, and then they saw, always, the first green shoot break up through the dark silt into the light, tender and pale and certain, the grain returning where it had seemed wholly gone. And that green shoot was Osiris to them, and it was the whole promise of the tale made visible, that what lies down into the dark rises again, renewed, that there is no true ending, only a resting and a return. And so they grew Osiris as a growing thing, in little beds of earth and seed shaped and tended in his honour, and watered them and watched the green come up, and it comforted them all the way down to the bottom of their hearts, the way the sight of a new green thing comforts anyone, in any age, forever. And here is the last and the gentlest turn of it, the part that changed everything and asked for nothing in return. In the very old days, in the age of the great pyramids we walked through a little while ago, the long journey beyond the sunset had seemed to belong most of all to the pharaoh, to the living god climbing his stairway of stone up toward Ra. But in this humane Middle Age, the comfort of Osiris opened, quietly and completely, to everyone. The green country beyond, the kind lord, the rest and the reunion and the return, these were now understood to be waiting not only for kings, but for the farmer at his shaduf, and the potter at his wheel, and the fisherman on his little skiff of bound reeds, for the mother and the child and the old grandfather dozing in the doorway, for every ordinary soul who had lived along the river in the ordinary way. Rest was for everyone now. Renewal was for everyone. And that, of all the gifts this settled age handed down the years, may be the kindest. And because it was so, the people began to make a quiet journey, when they could, to a certain small and holy town in the south called Abydos, where Osiris was honoured above all other places, and they went not as an army, and not in any hurry, but softly, a few at a time, down the river or along the field paths, to leave some small remembrance there, and to stand for a little while in the calm of that place, and feel themselves gathered into the long promise of the green shoot. There is a great peacefulness in imagining them, all those unhurried travellers over all those centuries, coming quietly to Abydos and going quietly home again, carrying a little of that comfort back to their own doorways along the water. Abydos, another soft name to set down and let go. You need not keep it. It will be there in the south if ever you want it, far off, and there is not the slightest need to reach for it now. So let this be where we rest tonight, at the edge of the black field in the blue last hour, with the tale of Osiris still warm in the quiet air around us. Let the story do for you what it did for them, all those thousands of years ago. Whatever of the day you are still holding, let it lie down now into the soft dark silt like the seed, with no fear in it, for nothing is truly ending, it is only resting, and only waiting. The good king rests in his green and gentle country beyond the sunset, and the devoted love keeps watch, and the child grows safe among the reeds, and above the still black field the first pale shoot is already there in the earth, certain and unhurried, ready to rise. The river runs on toward the sea exactly where we left it, slow and patient, breathing out into the dark. And you may let yourself go all the way down into the rest now, gently, gently, holding nothing at all, for the green thing keeps its soft promise of return, and morning when it comes will come on its own, and there is no hurry, none at all. Rest now, let it go. Drift. And the green shoot that we left half buried in the soft earth of that older, gentler age does not stay small forever, And it does not need to, for the years go on turning over it the way the river turns, slow and brown and patient, and the land drinks and rises again, and the little in-between quiets and the humane middle age fold behind us now like pages already read. And we do not have to hold them, we can let them lie, and we drift on down the river of years toward a brighter, taller time, and there is no hurry, none at all, so let your breath go long, and let me carry you. Because the river gathers itself once more, and gathers its people, and a new and great age rises along its banks like the flood rising in the night, unheard, unhurried, filling the low fields while the whole valley sleeps, and this is the age they would later call the New Kingdom, the high summer of Egypt, when the black land was rich and the granaries were full, and the ships went up and down the water with cedar and gold and jars of sweet things, and the pharaohs of this age were great builders and great keepers, and above all of them, higher than any of them, stood a city, and we are drifting toward it now, softly, the way a reed boat drifts when the boatman lays down his pole and simply lets the current have him. And the city is Thebes, the great southern city, far up the valley where the cliffs come close on either side and the desert waits gold and quiet just beyond the green. And Thebes lay along both banks of the Nile, the living city of houses and markets and gardens on the east where the sun rose, and the still city of the dead spreading westward toward the cliffs where the sun went down, and between them the river ran, wide and calm, carrying the little ferries back and forth, in the long warm light, and there is not the slightest need to reach for any of it now, only to see it. Only to let it be there in the dusk of your mind, the palms, the mud-brick walls warm from the day, the smell of water and dust and bread. And in Thebes there rose a house for a god, and it was called Karnak, and I want to take you into it slowly, because it was not built in one lifetime or by one king, but grew and grew across the ages, each pharaoh adding a hall, a gateway, a row of columns, an avenue of stone, until it became the largest house of worship that the ancient world would ever raise, and even now, even as a great quiet ruin under the same old sun, it can stop the breath in your chest. And so let us walk in gently, you and I, out of the bright day and in through the tall gateway into the cool. And the first thing is the dimness, the sudden merciful dimness after the glare. And the second thing is the size, the impossible size, for you are standing in a forest made of stone, and the columns rise all around you thick as ancient trees, so thick that a dozen people with their arms outstretched could hardly ring one round, and they go up and up into the shadow, and their tops open out like the crowns of great papyrus reeds and lotus flowers turned to stone. Carved buds and carved blossoms holding up the roof far overhead, and this was the great hall they call the hypostyle hall, the hall of many columns, and there are more than 100 of them, standing close in their long rows, and the light comes down only in narrow slots high up near the roof, falling in soft slanting bars through the dust and the old incense smoke of the ages, so that you walk from shadow into a pale beam and back into shadow, and the stone is cool under your hand, and everywhere on the columns and the walls are the carvings, the sacred carvings, painted once in blue and red and gold, kings and gods and offerings, and the long ribbons of hieroglyphs telling and telling and telling in the dark. And outside the great hall, still within the walls of Karnak, there lay a wide still pool of water, a sacred lake, dug square and calm and lined with stone, and its water was kept for the god, and in the cool of the dawn the priests would go down its steps and wash themselves clean in it before they went in to tend him. And at certain quiet festivals a little golden boat bearing the god's shrine would be carried out and set upon that still water, and drawn slowly across it in the early light, with the reflection of the columns and the reflection of the sky lying unbroken beneath, and the whole of it moving so gently that the water hardly stirred, and you may lie beside that lake in your mind if you like, in the grey gold hush before the sun is fully up, and watch the little boat glide out across the glass of it and back again, and hear the low slow singing carry over the water and fade, and there is nothing in it to hold and nothing in it to do. and this whole vast, cool, endless house belonged to a god named Amun-Ra, and he was the great god of this great age. And his name is really two names gently folded together, for Amun was the hidden one, the unseen breath, the god of the quiet air that you cannot see but only feel. And Ra we already know, Ra the sun, the bright face of the sky, and the people of Thebes joined them into one. The hidden and the shining, the breath and the blaze, Amun-Ra, the king of the gods. And they built him this stone forest so that his priests could tend him in the cool dark, could wake his image in the morning and wash it and dress it and set food before it and sing to it, and lay it down again at night, day after day after day, quietly, the small unhurried care of the god going on inside the great dim hall while outside the river ran and the fields grew. And it is a restful thing to think of, that patient tending in the shadow, and you need do nothing with it but let it soothe you. And out of this rich and building age, out of this city of the hidden shining god, comes a person I would like you to meet, and to meet gently, for hers is one of the calm and quietly remarkable stories of the whole long river, and her name was Hatshepsut, a woman who became pharaoh, who ruled the two lands not as a queen beside a king, but as a king in her own right, wearing the double crown, holding the crook and the flail, doing the thing that in that long ago age was almost always done by men, and doing it, by every sign we have, well and calmly, and for a long and prosperous while. And she came to the throne in a roundabout way, as a widow and a regent for a boy who was still a child, meant only to hold the land steady until he grew. And she held it so steadily and so well that in time she simply took up the full titles herself and became pharaoh outright. And there was no war in it that we need to watch, and no cruelty that we need to fear. Only a woman quietly gathering the great weight of the two lands into her own two hands and carrying it. And the land under her did not suffer for it. The land under her grew fat and peaceful. The trade went out and the treasure came in and the temples rose. And when we look back down the river at her, now she stands there calm and upright in the gold light, unbothered. And we can let her be exactly that. And because she was a great builder like the great builders of her age, she raised a temple for herself, and of all the temples of Egypt hers is perhaps the loveliest to hold in a drowsy mind, because it does not sit heavy on the ground like the others, but seems almost to rise out of the earth in steps, and it was built across the river from Thebes, on the western side, the side of the setting sun and the sleeping dead, in a great bay of golden cliffs, and the cliffs go straight up behind it, sheer and sun-warmed and enormous, and against them she set her temple in long low terraces, one above the other, joined by wide gentle ramps, with rows of pale columns marching along each level, so that the whole thing seems to climb in calm, even stages toward the rock. And to belong to the rock, the made stone and the wild stone rhyming together in the still air, and the place is called Deir el-Bahri, and once its terraces were gardens, with trees planted in the desert in deep pockets of good black earth carried there on purpose, and pools of water, and the sweet resin smell of myrrh trees standing in rows before the god. And imagine that. A green and watered garden climbing the foot of a bare gold cliff, in the great silence across the river from the city, with the shadows of the columns lying long and cool across the terraces in the evening. And upon the walls of that terraced temple Hatshepsut had carved the story of the thing she was proudest of, and it was not a battle, and it was not a conquest. It was a voyage. A long peaceful trading voyage to a far and half-legendary land away to the south. A warm green country somewhere down along the coasts beyond the end of Egypt. And they called it Punt, the land of Punt, the god's own land. And it was to them a place of wonders and sweetness, and she sent her ships down the water and out along the sea to reach it. And the carvings show it all, so that we can see it still, the tall ships with their wide sails and their many oars, and the strange round houses of Punt built up on stilts among the palm trees, and the people of that land coming down to trade in friendship, and the loading of the ships for the long way home, and what they carried home was not plunder, but living things and good things, gold and ebony and ivory and skins, and heaps of sweet-smelling resin, and most tenderly of all, whole living myrrh trees, dug up with their roots wrapped safe in balls of earth and carried aboard in baskets slung between the sailors, to be planted alive in the garden terraces of Deir el-Bahari, so that the incense trees of the God's own land would grow forever in Egypt. And I love that picture. The little trees riding home across the sea in their baskets of earth, tended the whole slow way, and there is nothing in the whole voyage to trouble you, no fighting and no fear, only ships on calm water and a friendly shore and the careful bringing home of gentle things, and you may sail on it as far into sleep as you like. And this was the temper of that high bright age at its best. The reaching out not to burn but to gather, the building not of tombs alone but of gardens and halls and long avenues where the god could be carried out in the sun once a year and brought home again to the cool. And the land was old already, so very old, older by more years than we can easily feel. For even in Hatshepsut's shining day the pyramids of Giza were more ancient to her than the oldest ruins of the deep past are to us, and she and her people walked among monuments already 1,000 and more years grey, and worshipped in shrines whose founders were long forgotten, and this is the deep restfulness that runs under everything in Egypt. That sense of a world so old it has become like the land itself, patient and unhurried, always having been there, and it is good to lie inside that oldness for a while, and let it hold you, the way the deep water holds the reed boat. And there were other great ones of this age whom we will not stop for now, other kings whose names ring like bronze, and there is a hidden valley over there among the western cliffs that we can already half see from the terraces of Deir el-Bahari, a still and secret place where the pharaohs of this high age would go to be kept safe. And there is a great river empire stretching up and down the water in these years, and all of it is waiting, patient and quiet, far off and in no hurry, and there is not the slightest need to reach for any of it now, for the river runs on exactly where we left it, and it will carry us there in its own good time. But for now let us not leave the great cool hall. Let us stay a little longer among the calm columns of Karnak as the day goes down outside, because there is no better place to rest, and the last light of the evening is coming in now through those high narrow slots near the roof, slanting down gold through the dust, moving slowly along the carved papyrus stems, touching a painted hieroglyph here, a raised god's face there, and then sliding on and fading, and the great stone forest fills with a soft blue shadow, column beyond column beyond column going back into the dark, cool and dim and endless, and it is very quiet, and very old, and very safe, and somewhere far off a single lamp is being lit, and the river is breathing out toward the sea, slow and patient, exactly as it always has, and there is nothing left in this hour for you to carry. So let your shoulders go heavy where you lie, and let the great columns stand for you, holding up the whole weight of the sky so that you need hold up nothing at all, and let the last gold bar of light slide slowly along the stone and go out, and let the blue shadow come, and rest now, and let it go, and drift, for the columns are patient and unhurried, and they will keep their long watch through the night, whether you are awake to see it or not, and if you are already sinking down past the sound of my voice into sleep among the quiet stone trees, then that is well, and that is good, and that is the whole and entire point, and the river runs on, exactly where we left it, and we will meet it again in the morning of the next long age. And so we leave the great columns of Karnak standing in their cool and endless dusk, and we drift on a little further down the river of years, the way you might turn from one long dim hall into another, and there is no hurry in the turning, and there is not the slightest need to hold on to anything we have already seen, for it is all safe, and it is all behind us, and the river runs on exactly where we left it, slow and brown and patient, breathing out toward the sea. And now the sun that was gathering into dusk over Thebes has slipped down behind the western cliffs, and we let ourselves be carried across the water, from the eastern bank where the living crowd and the temples blaze, over to the western bank, where the sun goes down, and where the dead are kept, gently, in the quiet of the hills. For the Egyptians divided their world softly along the river, the east for the rising and the living, the west for the setting and the resting. And it was no fearful place, that western shore, only a place of great stillness, where the light lay long and gold in the late afternoon, and the desert began, and the cliffs rose up pale and dry and unhurried, and behind them, hidden away out of sight, there was a valley. And here is a small change we have come to, a quiet turning in the long story, and I will tell it to you slowly, because it is the kind of thing that is pleasant to notice as you are drifting off. For once, long ago in the age of the Old Kingdom that we walked through together, the pharaohs had raised those enormous pyramids at Giza, the stairways of stone climbing up toward Ra, standing out on the desert edge for everyone to see, huge and bright and unmissable under the sun. And the pyramids were beautiful, and they were meant to be seen and to be marvelled at, mountains made by hands to lift a king toward the light. But a pyramid, you see, announces itself. It says, here is where the king is laid, here is the treasure, here is the door. And over the long, slow centuries, the pharaohs came to wish for something quieter, something more hidden, a resting place that did not stand up on the skyline and call out to be noticed. And so in the age of the New Kingdom, in the age of Thebes and Karnak that we have just come from, the kings made a gentle and a thoughtful choice, and they gave up the towering pyramid, and they turned instead to the hills. They chose that hidden valley in the western desert, across the river from Thebes, a dry fold in the cliffs where nothing grew and no one came, watched over from above by a single peak shaped, if you looked at it kindly, a little like a pyramid itself, a natural pyramid of stone that the gods had raised, so that the kings needed to raise no other. And there, deep in the rock, out of the sun, out of the reach of eyes, they cut their tombs down into the living stone, long corridors sloping gently into the hill, chamber leading to chamber, going down and down into the cool, dark quiet. And we call it now the Valley of the Kings, this still and secret place, and one after another, over the long years, the great pharaohs were carried across the water at evening and laid to rest here, in the hidden houses cut into the hills, and the entrances were closed, and the sand was let to drift over them, and the valley kept its silence. And it is a soft thing to think about, as you lie there in the warm dark, that a whole valley could be given over so completely to rest. That the men who ruled the greatest kingdom of the world would ask, at the end, only for a quiet room in the hills where the light would not reach them, and where they might sleep undisturbed under the peak that stood like a pyramid over them all. There is no hurry here. There was never any hurry here. The valley has been resting for thousands of years, and it is resting still. Now, a tomb cut into rock does not make itself, and I would like us to walk very slowly toward the people who made these hidden houses, because they are among the most tender company in all the long story of Egypt, and it comforts me to think of them, and I hope it will comfort you. For to carve a royal tomb and to paint its walls, generation after generation, you need craftsmen, skilled and patient and gathered close, quarrymen who cut the stone, and plasterers who smoothed the walls, and draughtsmen who laid out the figures, and painters who filled them with colour, and sculptors who cut the reliefs, and scribes who wrote the sacred words along the corridors. And these workers were not scattered up and down the land, but were kept together in a village of their own, a small walled town out in the desert behind the cliffs, within walking distance of the valley where they laboured, and we know this village, we know it very well, and it is called Deir el Medina. And here is the quiet wonder of it, the thing that makes me want to slow my voice almost to a whisper. For this was a village of the people who built houses of eternity for kings, and yet what has come down to us from them, out of the dry sand, is not grand at all, but small and ordinary and human and unbearably dear. For these craftsmen could write, many of them more than most people of their time, and when they wished to jot something down, some small thing, some note, some list, some grumble, they did not spend precious papyrus on it, but reached instead for a flake of white limestone, a chip broken off the stone they worked all day, or a broken shard of pottery, and on these little flakes, which we call ostraka, they scratched the small business of their lives. And the dry desert kept them, every one, safe in the sand for us to find. And so, from a village dead for 3,000 years, we have their ordinary days handed back to us, whole and intact, and they are not the days of gods and pharaohs at all, but the days of working men and their families. We have their lists of who came to work and who did not, and the reasons given. And the reasons are so gentle and so familiar that you might have heard them this very week. For a man was absent because he was ill, or because he was brewing beer, or because his wife or his daughter was unwell and he stayed to tend her, or because he was wrapping his dead, or, once, and I love this one, because he was simply too tired, or was quarrelling at home. And we have their notes of love, little messages passed between people who lived and worked and grew fond of one another under the same desert sun, and their complaints about their wages when the grain was late, and their remedies for aches, and their prayers, and the names of their cats. And it is such a soft and human thing to have all of that kept for us. The whole small texture of ordinary living, the tiredness and the tenderness and the beer and the bad backs, carried across 3,000 years on chips of stone, so that these long-gone men and women are, in a quiet way, still with us, still faintly speaking. There is nothing here to trouble the heart. It is only life, going gently on, the way it has always gone, the way it is going on for you tonight, and it asks nothing of you now but that you rest. And these were the hands, these dear El Medina hands, that made the walls of the hidden tombs so beautiful, and I want you to picture those walls for just a moment. But softly, without any effort, letting the images come as they will, for the corridors that ran down into the rock were painted from floor to ceiling in colours that stayed as fresh as the day they were laid, deep reds and golden yellows and that particular Egyptian blue, and the figures walked along the walls in their calm procession, the gods with their kind and steady faces, the goddess with her single feather, the boats sailing the underworld river, the fields of the blessed where the grain grew tall, the sun going down in the west and rising again in the east, all of it painted to keep the king company and to guide him gently on his long journey, hymns and prayers and maps of the quiet country that waited beyond. And the painters worked by the light of little lamps, much like the lamp we lit at the door of our reed house at the edge of the river, wicks floating in oil, and they used a smokeless mixture. It is thought salt in the oil, so that the ceilings would not blacken as they worked, and so the images were made in a soft and careful glow, deep in the hill, hour after patient hour, and then the corridors were sealed, and the paintings were left in the dark, waiting, keeping, and now I would like to speak very gently of the keeping of the body itself, of what the Egyptians called by no fearful name, but understood simply as the careful and loving preparation of one who had died. And we should not be uneasy about it, you and I, for there is nothing in it to disturb our rest. And the Egyptians themselves saw it not with horror, but with a great and tender care, the way you might wrap a precious thing for a long journey so that it comes to no harm along the way. For they believed that the person did not end, but went on and travelled, and needed to be kept whole and safe for that travelling, and so they gave to their dead the most patient attention, over many weeks, unhurried, following the old and gentle rites. And the body was washed, and treated, and dried slowly in a natural salt from the desert, natron it was called, drawn from the dry lake beds, which drew the moisture out and kept the form intact, and this took its long, slow time, 40 days and more, and there was no hurry in any of it, for the dead are past all hurrying, and time was given freely. And then the careful wrapping began, the long strips of fine linen wound round and round, gently layer upon layer, and it was slow patient work, and as the wrappers worked they laid in among the linen small amulets, little charms of protection, tucked close to the body, a scarab beetle over the heart for the renewal of each morning, and the small blue eye of Horus for wholeness and for health, and the pillar of Osiris for steadiness, and a knot of Isis for her sheltering care, each one a small silent wish for the safety and the peace of the one who slept. And prayers were spoken over the wrapping, and sweet resins were laid among the folds, and the face was covered at last with a mask, calm and golden and serene, so that the sleeper might be known, and might look out untroubled on the world to come. And it was all, from first to last, an act of love, a keeping, a wrapping warm of someone dear against the long cool journey ahead, and there is no need to think of it in any other way, and no need to think of it much at all now. Only to let the word keeping settle over you, soft as the linen, and let it be enough. And when the keeping was done, the wrapped and quiet sleeper was carried across the river at evening, over to the western shore and up into the hidden valley, and laid at last in the house of eternity that the dear El Medina hands had cut and painted, deep in the rock. And around the sleeper they set the things that might be wished for in the long country beyond, not because the dead had need of grasping, but as a gift, as one packs small comforts for a traveller, the chairs and the beds and the boxes and the games, the jars of grain and honey and wine, the little figures who would do the work so the sleeper need not, the jewels and the golden things, the flowers, sometimes real flowers laid in with tender hands, dried now these thousands of years but once fresh cut and fragrant. And then the priest said the last words, and the mourners went softly back down toward the river, and the door of the tomb was closed, and the passage was filled, and the seal was pressed into the wet plaster, and the sand was let to drift, and the house of eternity was left to its long and perfect quiet. And the tomb kept everything. That was its whole and gentle purpose, to hold, to keep, to guard the sleeper and the small bright treasures in the dark, patient and unhurried, asking nothing, waiting for nothing, only keeping. And most of the world above forgot it was there. The paths blew over, and the workers of Deir el Medina grew old and were themselves laid to rest, and new kings came, and old kings were forgotten, and the valley kept its silence under its pyramid-shaped peak, and the painted corridors held their colours in the perfect dark, and the amulets lay close against the linen, and the golden mask looked calmly up at nothing, and the years went by in their thousands, and the river went on breathing out toward the sea, exactly where we left it. And the desert went on keeping what it had been given. And somewhere in that still valley, though we will not reach it now, and there is not the slightest need to reach for it now, there was one small tomb, humbler than the rest, cut quickly for a king who died very young, and it too was sealed and left, and the sand drifted over it deeper than over any other, and it was very nearly forgotten. And it slept there, whole and untouched, holding all its quiet treasure safe in the dark, waiting, keeping, through more years than we can easily imagine, for a finding that lay so far off in the future that no one who sealed that little door could ever have dreamed of it. But that is a light for another evening, and it is far off, and it can stay far off, and there is nothing there but keeping, and keeping is a soft and a restful thing. So let us leave the valley now, as the last of the daylight goes from the tops of the cliffs, and let the sealed doors stay sealed, and the painted walls stay dark and safe, and the little flakes of limestone with their tired men and their beloved cats lie quiet in the sand. All of it held, all of it kept, none of it lost. The river runs on below us, slow and patient in the blue hour, and the lamp still burns in the doorway of our reed and mud house at the water's edge, its wick floating and steady, and the black fields lie cool, and the red desert lies still, and the great sky comes out in its thousands of stars over a valley that has been resting, contentedly, for longer than we can hold in the mind. There is no hurry, there is nothing to do and nowhere to be. The house of eternity keeps its treasure safe in the dark, and asks only the same of you, that you let yourself be kept for a while, wrapped warm and easy in the quiet, and breathe out slow, the way the river breathes out toward the sea, and let the valley hold its silence, and let your shoulders go, and let it all go, and drift, gently, down toward sleep. And so we leave that sealed tomb resting in its quiet valley, and we drift on down the river of years slow and patient as the water itself, and there is no hurry, none at all, for the river runs on exactly where we left it, breathing out toward the sea. And a little further along the bank, in a lane not so very far from the one we have just set down, we come to one of the strangest and gentlest turns in this whole long story, and it is a turn all about light, about a single disk of sun hanging in a wide pale sky, and we will walk into it softly, the way you would walk out of a cool dim temple into a warm open morning, letting your eyes grow used to the brightness, letting the day settle over you without the smallest need to hurry. For a long time now, all through these New Kingdom years, the great god of Thebes had been Amun-Ra, the hidden one joined to the sun, keeper of the vast stone forest at Karnak, tended by his priests in the cool dark of the columns. And the gods of Egypt were many, and they were old, older than memory, a whole warm crowd of them, each with a temple and a story and a share of the offerings. And the people loved them and lived among them the way you live among familiar furniture, in a house you have known all your life. But into this crowded and comfortable house of gods there came, one evening in the long story, a young pharaoh with a quiet and unusual mind, and his name was Akhenaten. He had not been born to that name. He came to the throne as one more prince in the great line, and at first he wore the old names and honoured the old gods as every pharaoh had done. But there was in him, from early on, a fascination with one thing above all others. And that thing was the sun itself, not the many-faced god behind it, not the stories layered over it through the centuries, but the plain and shining disk you can see any afternoon riding high over the black fields, pouring its warmth down on everything alike, on the palace and the reed hut, on the crocodile in the shallows and the child asleep in the doorway. And he came to feel that this disk, which he called the Aten, was the one true living source of all of it, the hand that opened every morning and let the world grow warm, and that it needed no crowd of other gods around it, only itself, high and bright and generous, giving and giving without asking anything back. And you may let that thought rest softly in you as you lie there, the simple thought of warmth coming down from far away and touching everything gently and without preference, the same warmth for everyone, and there is something restful in it, something that asks nothing of you, only that you lie still beneath it and be warmed. Beside this pharaoh, all through his reign, there stood a queen, and her name has become one of the most beautiful and best-loved names to come down to us out of all this ancient country, and that name is Nefertiti. We have her face still, carved and painted, the long graceful neck and the calm level eyes and the tall crown, and we do not need to know all the details of her days to feel, looking at her, a kind of serene and finished beauty, a face at rest. And Akhenaten and Nefertiti ruled together in a way we do not often see, shown side by side again and again, in the sunlight, under the reaching rays of the Aten, each ray ending in a small open hand, as if the light itself were reaching down to touch them, and there is no need to reach up for it in return, only to be touched. Now this pharaoh who loved the one sun disk did a thing that no one had quite done before, a thing that must have astonished the old priests in their dim halls, for he decided to leave the crowded holy cities behind entirely, and to build, on empty ground, out where no god had ever been settled, and no temple had ever stood, a brand new city all his own. A fresh, clean place, belonging only to the Aten and to the light. And he found a wide bare curve of desert on the east bank of the river, ground that no other god could claim, ground that was simply open and waiting, and there he raised his city, and he called it Akhetaten, which means the horizon of the Aten, the place where the sun disk comes up over the edge of the world. And it rose quickly, as such dreamed of cities do, palaces and broad sunlit courts and temples that were not dim and roofed and secret like the old ones, but open to the sky, open on purpose, so that the sunlight could pour straight down onto the altars and the offerings, so that nothing came between the worshipper and the warm disk overhead. There were gardens and pools, and painted floors with ducks and reeds and rippling water, and wide avenues, and houses for the officials and the craftsmen and the servants, A whole living city called up out of the empty sand in a single lifetime, all of it turned like a face toward the sun. And you might imagine, if it pleases you as you lie there, the mornings in that place, the light coming up over the eastern cliffs and pouring straight down the open avenues, the water in the pools going gold, the painted ducks on the floors seeming almost to stir, the whole city waking not into shadowed temples but into the plain warm brightness of the day, the bakers at their ovens and the potters at their wheels, and the children running out into the sun, and the great disk climbing quietly overhead, watching over all of it with its many gentle reaching hands. It was a city built to be happy in the light, and for a little while, a bright and unrepeatable little while it was. And in this city the art itself changed, and this is one of the tenderest parts of the whole turning, for the artists of Akhetaten began to carve and paint in a new and softer and more human way. The old art had been grand and still and eternal, the pharaoh always upright and perfect and the same, gazing off into forever. But now the royal family was shown in a warmer, gentler light, the king and queen sitting easily together, their daughters climbing into their laps, a hand reaching to touch a chin, a small child leaning sleepily against a parent, ordinary loving gestures caught and kept in stone, as if the artists had been asked to show not gods only, but a family in the sunshine. And there is a great sweetness in that, a family at ease under the light, unhurried, unafraid, and we may rest a moment in the warmth of it, for it is a rare and lovely thing. In all the long, solemn parade of god-kings and towering monuments we have walked past together, to come upon a moment so tender and so plainly human, a father with a small daughter on his knee, a mother bending her tall crowned head toward a sleepy child, and to know that the same hands that ruled a kingdom paused, now and then to touch a little chin, to hold a small warm hand, under the same falling light that touched the fields and the river and the cattle in the grass. And you need do nothing at all with that thought, only let it lie warm against you in the dark, the way a child leans and settles, and grows heavy against the one who holds it, safe, unhurried, needing nothing more than to be near the warmth and let the day go. And out of this city and this rain there comes to us a poem, one of the loveliest things ever written down beside the Nile, and it is called The Great Hymn to the Aten, and it is simply a long glad praising of the sunrise and all that the light does for the living world. It speaks of the dawn coming up over the horizon and the darkness lifting, and the people waking and washing and dressing and going out to their work, and the cattle content in their fields, and the birds lifting from their nests with their wings spread in praise, and the fish leaping in the river toward the light, and even the chick inside its egg breathing by the warmth of the sun and stirring and breaking out into the day. It is a hymn with no fear in it at all, no threat, and no darkness that is not simply the gentle darkness of night when the world lies down to sleep, and it names the sun the maker of the seasons, the filler of the whole land with its beauty, and it thanks the light for being, quite simply, kind. And you may let its images pass through you slowly, the birds with their wings open, the calves in the grass, the small chick warm inside its shell, all of it lit and loved and asking nothing, and let the hymn sing you a little way down toward sleep. But you know, as we lie here so far downstream, that this bright city could not hold the whole of Egypt to itself forever. For the land was old, and its gods were older still, and its people had loved their many gods for a very long time, and a single sun disk on a bare stretch of desert, however lovely, was a hard thing to keep alight against all that ancient weight of habit and affection. And so when Akhenaten, at the last, laid his reign down and passed on into the keeping of the light he had loved, the great change he had made began, very quietly and without any violence we need to watch, to come undone. The old gods were welcomed back, gently, the way you might open the shutters of a long-closed house and let the familiar air move through it again. Amun returned to his temples, the priests came back to Karnak, and the bright new city on its curve of empty ground, the horizon of the Aten, so newly raised, was quietly left behind. And let that leaving be soft in your mind, for it was not a burning and not a battle. It was only a slow emptying, a drifting away. One by one the officials moved back to the older cities, and the workshops fell still, and the painted floors gathered dust, and the pools dried, and the wind came in off the desert as it always does, and began, grain by grain, patiently, over years and then over centuries, to lay its fine pale sand across the courts and the avenues and the open sunlit temples, until the whole dreamed of city lay sleeping under the desert, given back to the quiet, kept safe in the sand the way this country keeps everything safe, waiting, with all the time in the world and not the slightest need to wake. And it would sleep there, that gentle city of light, until people came looking, long ages afterward, and lifted its story back into the day. But that finding is far off, and there is not the slightest need to reach for it now. And into the settling after that bright rain there came a small figure, a child, a boy who would grow into one of the most famous names the whole world now knows, though in his own time he was only a young king in a country steadying itself after a great change. His name at first carried the old sun disk in it, but as the land turned back toward its ancient gods, his name was turned as well, and he became Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun, the boy who set the old gods back in their places and let Egypt settle again into its long familiar ways. He was very young when he came to the throne, and he was still very young when he died. Only a boy, really. A boy king who ruled for a handful of quiet years and then slipped away into the great keeping long before his hair had gone grey, before he had done any of the enormous things that fill the reigns of the great pharaohs. And there is a tenderness in that too, in a young life laid gently down, and we will not linger on the how or the why of it, for those battles and questions have been over for more than 3,000 years, and there is no need to reach for them. Only to know that he was young, and that he was loved, and that he was carefully kept. For when he died, his people did for him all the careful, loving things they did for their kings, the wrapping and the amulets and the golden mask laid over his still face, the small treasures gathered around him, the chariots and the chairs and the little painted boxes, the flowers even, real flowers, laid on him by hands that grieved, garlands of leaves and petals that would still be there. Dry and brown but unmistakable, thousands of years later. And because he was a small king who had reigned only a little while, his tomb was a small one, cut low into the floor of that same still valley across the river from Thebes, a modest house of eternity, sealed and plastered and stamped, and then covered over, and then, in time, half forgotten, as other. Grander tombs were cut nearby, and the rubble of their making was heaped across his door. And that, as it turned out, was the greatest gift the valley could have given him. For while the towering tombs of the mighty kings were found and entered and emptied over the long centuries, this small boy king's little sealed door lay hidden under the heaped stone and the drifted sand, passed over. Overlooked, kept, while the whole immense parade of the rest of this story went by above it. Dynasties rose and settled and passed. The great queen we will meet at the very end had not yet been dreamed of. Rome had not yet been thought of. And still the boy slept on in his small stamped tomb, with his golden face and his flowers and his quiet treasure all around him, undisturbed, in the dark, kept faithfully by the sand for more than 3,000 years, waiting with a patience so deep it is almost like peace. And so we leave him there, and it is a good and gentle place to leave, for there is nothing troubling in it at all, only a young king safely kept. Only a small sealed door under the warm sand of the valley, holding its bright, quiet treasure in the dark, in no hurry. In no danger, waiting through all the long ages for a light that will not come for a very great while yet, and there is not the slightest need to reach for that finding now. The river runs on exactly where we left it, slow and brown, breathing out toward the sea. The lamp still burns its small steady flame in the doorway of the reed and mud house at the edge of the water, and you may let the sun city and the sun hymn and the small golden king all drift a little further off, far off, softly kept, while you lie here easy and warm beneath your own quiet dark, and breathe and let it go and rest. And so we leave the boy king asleep in his small tomb in the valley, sealed and quiet and safe, and we let the river carry us a little further along, gently, the way it always does, with no jolt and no hurry, only the slow brown water sliding north under the wide evening sky, and as it carries us we drift out of that troubled bright season of the sun heresy, and into a long, calm afternoon. The kind of afternoon that seems as if it will never end, golden and warm and heavy with light. And this is the age we come to now. The age of the great builder, the age of monuments, and we can walk into it slowly, you and I, with nothing to fear and nothing to hurry toward, because everything here has been finished for thousands of years, and all that is left of it now is the warm stone and the warm sand and the patient river running on exactly where we left it. Before the great builder there was his father, and it is right that we begin with him, softly the way a family begins, for his name was Seti the First, and he was a careful and thoughtful king who set the land in order after the strange, bright interruption of the Sun City had passed and the old gods had been welcomed home again, and Seti loved fine work, delicate work. The kind of carving that is cut so shallow and so true that the stone itself seems to breathe, and if you were ever to stand in the long cool halls of his temple at a place called Abydos, the very place where the pilgrims went to be near the kind Lord Osiris, you would see walls covered in the softest, most graceful reliefs ever made in that land, figures with calm faces and gently lifted hands, gods and kings greeting one another in a stillness that has lasted 3,000 years, and there is nothing sharp in any of it, nothing loud, only that quiet dignity, and Seti built and mended and gathered the threads of the kingdom back into one steady hand, and when his long work was done, he lay down to his rest, and his son took up the double crown, and the son's name was Rameses. Rameses II, they call him now, Rameses the Great, and he ruled for so very long, for more than 60 years, so long that men and women were born and grew old and had grandchildren of their own, and never once in all their lives knew any other king upon the throne. And there is something restful in that, something steadying. A whole lifetime lived under one long unbroken reign, like a single endless afternoon, and Ramesses built and built and built, more than any pharaoh before him or after, until his name was carved on temples the whole length of the river, from the green delta in the north all the way up past the cataracts into the south, his cartouche cut deep and sure into stone after stone, so that even now, wherever you wander in that ancient land, sooner or later you will come upon his name again, patient and unhurried, waiting in the warm rock. He raised a whole new city in the north, in the delta, near the old lands of his family, and he named it after himself, and it had bright temples and cool gardens and pools where the lotus opened, and he set up towering statues of himself before the great temples, and he added his own vast hall of columns onto the endless house of Amun-Ra in the south, and he mended the works of the kings who had gone before, and, here and there, quietly wrote his own name over theirs, the way a proud and long-lived king will do, and none of it was hurried. All of it was the slow, patient labour of the flood seasons, year upon year. Crew after crew of ordinary farmers hauling and lifting and setting the great stones while the river was high and the fields lay under water, exactly as their great-grandfathers had done for the Pyramid Kings so many ages before. The same warm, unhurried work under the same wide sky. And of all the things he raised, there is one place we will go and sit for a while, far up the river in the south, where the desert crowds close to the water, and the cliffs stand tawny and bare against the sky, and there, cut straight back into the living rock of the cliff itself, sit 4 enormous seated figures, 4 colossi of the king, each one so tall that a grown person standing at the base would reach barely to the ankle. 4 calm giants side by side with their hands resting on their knees and there. Faces gazing out over the river toward the rising sun, and this place is called Abu Simbel. The stone was not carted in and stacked up the way the old pyramids were built, block upon block. No, this was carved the other way, carved inward. The sculptors going into the cliff and cutting away everything that was not the temple until the mountain itself had become a doorway and four-seated kings. And behind those giants the passage runs back and back into the dark, deep into the heart of the rock, through halls held up by more standing figures, on and on, until it reaches a small still chamber at the very end, the innermost sanctuary, where a few carved gods sit waiting in the deepest quiet of the hill. And here is the gentle wonder of that place, the thing the old builders knew and set into the stone on purpose, so long ago, with such patience. For most of the year that inner chamber lies in darkness, cool and silent and untouched by the sun, folded away in the middle of the mountain. But twice each year, only twice, on two certain mornings, the sun rises at just the right place along the horizon, and its first long ray comes level across the desert and slips in through the far doorway between the giant knees, and travels all the way down that deep passage, through hall after hall, through more than 50 paces of darkness, and reaches at last into the innermost room, and lays a band of warm gold across the faces of the seated gods, and lights them for a few slow minutes, and then withdraws, and the dark comes softly back, and the mountain keeps its stillness again until the next appointed dawn. Think of it, the care of that, the quiet cleverness, to line a whole mountain up with the sunrise, so that light would come and visit the gods on the right mornings and no others, and it still happens, still. All these thousands of years later, the sun still finds the door, still walks down the passage, still touches the faces in the dark, patient and unhurried, keeping its old appointment as if no time had passed at all. Now Rameses was a builder above all else, but the songs of his age remembered him as a warrior too, and there was a famous battle, far to the north, beyond the edge of Egypt, in the dusty hills near a city called Kadesh, where the armies of Egypt met the armies of another great kingdom, the Hittites, who came down from the cold mountains of the north, and the two great powers pushed against one another there among the chariots and the standards. And we will not go and stand in that noise, you and I, for it is not what we came for, and besides, it has been over. All of it, for more than 3,000 years, and the dust settled long ago, and the men who fought there laid down their weapons and grew old and were gathered to their rest. So let the battle lie out there in the dark where it belongs, far off, and there is not the slightest need to reach for it now. For what matters about Kadesh, the part worth carrying with us into the quiet, is not the fighting at all but what came after, for neither side truly won, and neither side was truly broken, and after some years of pushing and wariness the two great kings did a thing that was new in all the world, a thing no one had done before, in a way that was written down and kept, for they made peace, a real peace, set down in careful words and pressed onto tablets and sworn before the gods of both lands. The very first written peace treaty that has come down to us from anywhere on the earth, and each king kept his own copy, and each promised not to war upon the other, and to be as brothers, and to help one another, and to send back those who fled, and even, in the warm human way of it, to be kind. And so the war was laid quietly down, folded up and put away, and the two old enemies became friends, and there were letters between the royal houses after that, and even a marriage to seal the bond. And the border grew still, and this is a good thing to hold as we drift, that the greatest builder of that ancient world is remembered not only for the stone he raised, but for the peace he wrote. For the moment two powerful men chose to set the fighting down and let it be over, which is, when you think on it in the dark, exactly the thing we are all trying to do as we lie here now, to set the day's small battles down, to let them be over, to let them go. And Rameses lived on and on after that, long into a great old age, until his hair was white and his sons had grown old before him, more sons than most men could name, and the land lay full and prosperous and calm under his long shadow, the granaries full, the temples finished, the river rising each year and laying down its black gift across the fields exactly as it always had. And the people going out to plant and coming back to harvest, and lifting the water with the shadoof and pressing the grain into bread and beer. The small good ordinary days going on and on beneath the enormous rain, and when at last the great king lay down and was carefully kept and carried to his own house of eternity in the valley, the whole land must have felt the strangeness of it, that there could be a morning without him, for no one living could remember a time before. And yet the sun rose all the same, and the river ran on, and another Rameses took the crown, and then another, and another after that, until there were so many kings of that name that they blur together now like a row of lamps seen far down a long dim hall. And here, gently, without any alarm, the long golden afternoon begins to lengthen into evening, the way afternoons always do, softly and without our quite noticing when the light changed, for the great age of building had spent itself. And the kings who came after the great Rameses were smaller kings, holding a heavier world. And away beyond the borders the tribes and peoples were moving and shifting the way peoples do, and the wide empire that the new kingdom had reached out to hold, up along the coast and off into distant lands, began quietly to draw back in, like a hand that has been open a long while, and now, tired, closes gently toward home. And there is no catastrophe in this, no crash, only a slow and natural settling, the tide going out as tides do, unhurried, patient, taking its own long time. And the great temple still stood, and the priests still kept the rites, and the incense still rose in the house of Amun-Ra, and the river still flooded every single year without fail, faithful as ever, and the farmers still went out into the black land at the edge of the red land, and life along the water went on almost unchanged in its small daily shape, but the single strong hand that had held the two lands so firmly for so long began softly to loosen, and the north and the south drifted a little apart, the delta looking one way and the far valley looking another, and the priests of Amun in the great southern city grew powerful in their own right and governed the south, almost as kings themselves, while other lines held the north, and the one bright kingdom eased apart into a quieter, more divided time, a time of smaller powers and gentler ambitions, and this too is only the land breathing out, only the long, slow exhale after the great inhale of empire, nothing to be troubled by, nothing to reach for it happened so long ago, and it happened so slowly, and all of it settled and grew still an unimaginably long time before either you or I was ever here to watch. So let it settle, let the empire draw in its open hand and fold it gently home. Let the great reign end and the smaller kings take up their smaller cares, and let the north and the south drift softly apart under the same wide starry sky, for none of it needs anything from us tonight. And all of it is finished, and the river runs on exactly where we left it, slow and brown and patient, breathing out toward the sea. And far to the south, at Abu Simbel, the four great colossi go on sitting where the sculptors left them, their vast calm hands upon their knees, their vast calm faces turned toward the place where the sun comes up, and as the long centuries pass over them, the desert wind carries the fine sand up against their legs, grain by grain, drift by drift, unhurried, patient, until the warm sand has climbed halfway up those enormous seated kings, and lies banked soft and golden against the stone. And they do not mind, they were never in any hurry. They sit half buried in the warm sand, with the great river sliding by below them, and the enormous sky wheeling slowly overhead, keeping their old appointment with the sunrise twice a year, and their long silence all the rest. And they are content, and there is nothing left in them now but peace. So rest there with them a moment, in the warm sand under the warm stars, and let the great king and his monuments and his long golden afternoon settle softly into the quiet, and breathe out, slow and easy, and let it go and drift. And so we leave the great colossi of Abu Simbel sitting there in the warm south, patient and half-buried, their four calm faces turned toward a sun that will keep on rising for them long after the age that carved them has quietly gone to rest, and we let the river carry us onward, softly, the way it always does, downstream and forward through the years, in no hurry at all, for there is no hurry here, there never was. We are drifting now into the long evening of Egypt, and I want you to feel how gentle a thing that is. This word, evening, not an ending and not a fall, only the part of a very long day when the light goes golden and low, and everything that has been standing all afternoon simply keeps on standing, a little more slowly, a little more softly, in a light that forgives it everything. The great pharaohs, the temple builders, the movers of mountains of stone, they have handed the land on, one to the next, exactly as we have watched them do, and now they hand it on again, into centuries that will not build quite so high, and that is all right, that is completely all right, because by now the land itself has become the great thing, older than any king who walks upon it. And we are simply going to walk beside it in the lengthening light and watch it go on being what it has always been. For here is the tender secret at the heart of this chapter, and I would like you to let it settle over you like a blanket drawn up in the dark, warm and heavy and kind. By the time we reach this long evening, Egypt is already old. Not old the way you and I mean when we say a thing is old, a house of a few generations, a tree of 100 years. But old past the edge of imagining, old the way the hills are old the way the river is old. The pyramids of Giza, which we watched the patient farmers raise stone by stone under the flood-season sky, are by now themselves as ancient to the people living beneath them as the deepest ruins of the deepest past are to you, tonight, in your bed. A person could stand in the shadow of Khufu's pyramid in this long evening and know that it had already been standing for 2,000 years before they were born, already worn, already legendary, already a thing that grandfathers told grandchildren about in voices lowered with wonder. And so everyone who comes to Egypt now, everyone, comes to it the way a traveller comes to a cathedral or a great old forest, hushed and a little awed, and aware that they are only passing through something far, far older than themselves. Let that thought be a comfort to you. You are lying down inside a very old and very patient world, and it has held far more than you, and it holds you easily, and there is nothing at all you need to carry. The first to come, in this soft dimming, come up out of the south, and I love them for the reason they come, and I think you will too. Far up the Nile, past the cataracts where the river tumbles white over black stones, lay the land of Cush, the kingdom of Nubia, a people who had lived alongside Egypt for as long as there had been an Egypt, sometimes trading, sometimes quarrelling, but always looking north with something like love at the old gods and the old temples and the old careful ways. And when the northern land grew tired and divided and let its unity slip loose, the way an old hand loosens in sleep, it was these southern kings, these kings of Cush, who came gently up into Egypt and gathered it back into one, not to break it, but to keep it. We call them the Black Pharaohs, the 25th dynasty, and they wore the double crown and took the old titles and honoured Amun-Ra with a devotion deeper than many a native king before them. For they were not conquerors coming to spoil a treasure, they were guardians coming home to a house they had always revered. And here is the thing I most want to give you about them, the small bright detail to hold as you drift, for they loved the pyramid so, that ancient shape we thought the land had finished with forever, that they raised pyramids again, down in their own southern country, at a place called Nuri and a place called El Kuru, slender steep-sided pyramids by the dozen, tombs for their kings in the old holy manner, so that even now, far up the river in the desert of Sudan, there stand more pyramids than in all of Egypt itself, a whole quiet field of them, keeping their kings under the same enormous stars. Is that not a lovely thing to know as the light goes low? That the oldest dream of this land, the stone stair reaching toward Ra, did not die but only travelled south, and was raised again by people who simply could not bear to let so beautiful a thing be forgotten. And then, as the evening deepens, other peoples come, as peoples always do to a rich and famous and unimaginably old land, and I am going to name them only softly, and let their comings and goings lie out in the dark where they belong, for the fighting is over. It has been over for thousands of years, and it cannot reach us here. The Assyrians came out of the far northeast, a hard and iron people, and they pushed into Egypt for a while as armies do, and then the tide of them drew back out again the way all tides do. And the river did not so much as pause. The river went on flooding and falling exactly as it had for 3,000 years, laying its black silt down over the black fields, feeding the wheat and the barley and the flax, and the farmers went out at the flood's retreat and pressed their seed into the soft mud, and the whole vast patient business of living went on almost entirely unchanged beneath the changing of the crowns. That is the deep, restful truth of these years, and I want you to lean your whole weight on it, the way you are leaning your weight now into the pillow and the mattress and the good solid earth below. Kings came and kings went, and empires rose in the distance like weather, and the priests still rose before dawn in the cool of Karnak, and washed and dressed the image of the god, and burned the sweet resin, and sang the morning hymn exactly as it had been sung 10 centuries before. And the scribe still sharpened his reed pen, and mixed his black ink, and ruled his neat lines on the papyrus, and the potter still turned his wheel, and the fisherman still poled his little skiff of bound reeds out onto the still green water in the pink of the morning, and none of the great far-off comings and goings changed, by a hair's breadth, the shape of an ordinary day beside the Nile. Rest in that. The important things, the small things, the true things, went on. Picture, if it pleases you, one such ordinary morning in the middle of all that changing, a morning belonging to no famous name and no remembered year, just a morning like 10,000 others. A woman kneels at the water's edge with a shallow basket, rinsing the dark river mud from a handful of green herbs, and above her on the low mud roof the doves are murmuring to themselves in the first warmth. And somewhere behind her a child is being sung, a very old song to keep it quiet while the bread bakes, a song already so old that no one remembers who first made it. And the ox lows softly in its pen, and the smell of the flat loaves comes drifting on the still air, far away in some marble city she will never see. A crown is passing from one head to another, and it means less than nothing to this morning, less than the dove's murmur, less than the smell of the bread. And that is not a sad thing, my friend. It is the very kindest thing I know, that the whole enormous weight of empires and their quarrels could pass overhead like a slow cloud, and leave the woman and her herbs and her bread and her softly singing child entirely untouched, going on and going on and going on. Let the great names float away over the fields like that slow cloud. The bread is what is real. The river is what is real. The small warm morning is what is real, and it is yours to rest inside of now. And after the Assyrians drew back there came a gathering in, a gentle straightening of the shoulders, that we call the Site Age, after the northern city of Sais in the green delta where its kings made their home, and it was a soft and lovely time, a looking backward time. And it has the flavour of exactly the mood we are in tonight. For these kings, ruling a land already so ancient it staggered the mind, looked back across all those thousands of years toward the very oldest days, the days of Djoser and Imhotep and the first pyramids, and they loved that far dawn so tenderly that they set about copying it, deliberately, lovingly. Their artists studied the crisp clean carvings of the Old Kingdom and made new ones in the same pure old style, so faithful that we can scarcely tell across the centuries which is the ancient thing and which the loving copy. Their scribes copied out the oldest texts, the oldest spells, the oldest wisdom, and kept it safe. It was an age that turned to face its own deep past and said, quietly, "We remember you. We will not let you be lost." And I find that unbearably gentle, that a civilization grown so old should spend part of its evening simply and carefully remembering its own morning, the way an old person by the fire will sometimes go back, softly, happily, to the earliest and sweetest of all their days. The whole land had become by now a keeper of its own long memory, a library of itself. The world's own long remembering, and that is why we came to it, you and I, you must remember, to walk down this very river of years, and here the river itself has learned to do what we are doing. Then came the Persians, out of the great East, the mightiest empire the world had yet seen, and they too folded Egypt into their vast dominion for a long stretch of years, their governors sitting in the old palaces, their tribute boats going down the river to the sea, and yet even they, masters of half the known earth, walked softly in this land, for even to the great king of Persia, ruler of more peoples than could be counted, Egypt was the ancient one, the venerable one, the land whose temples were grey with an age his own proud cities could not begin to rival. There is a kind of peace in being so old that the mightiest visitor must lower his voice in your presence. Egypt had that peace now. It had outlived so much. It had watched so many strong young powers come striding up the river full of their own importance, and it had fed them its grain and shown them its wonders and taught them its reverence, and then watched them fade in their turn while it went on, unhurried, patient, the temple still standing, the incense still rising, the flood still coming faithfully every single year to lay down the black gift of new soil, the river still breathing out slow and steady toward the sea, and the people in the reed and mud houses at the water's edge lit their small lamps at the last blue hour, exactly as they always had, exactly as the one lamp is burning now in the doorway we have been watching all this long night, its little floating wick steady in the still air, and the great sky came out over the black fields and the red desert in its thousands upon thousands of stars, and the day was set down, softly, and the land slept, and rose, and worked, and slept again. That is the whole shape of this long evening, and you may let all its names and its dynasties and its comings and goings slip out of your hands now, gently, for you do not need to hold a single one of them. They are far off, and there is not the slightest need to reach for any of them tonight. Keep only the feeling, if you keep anything at all, and even the feeling you may let go. Keep only this, that there was a land so patient and so old that it had become the memory of the world, and that whoever came to it, from the south or the east or the far cold north, came as a guest into something ancient and unmovable and calm, and that beneath all the changing of the crowns, the true life of the place, the small warm daily life of bread and beer and river mud and lamplight, went on almost entirely undisturbed, generation after unhurried generation, as steady as the flood, as steady as your own slow breathing now, in and out, like the river breathing out toward the sea. We are far along the river of years now, you and I, further than we have ever been, and up ahead, out past the delta where the great water at last spreads wide and lets itself go into the salt of the sea, there is one last light beginning to kindle on the northern shore, one last golden city, the brightest and most learned of them all, and a name still to come, a Greek boy welcomed as a friend, and a great harbour, and a tall white tower of flame, and the last of all the long, long line of those who wore the double crown. But that light is still far off, out there at the river's mouth, and there is not the slightest need to sail toward it now. Let it wait for us. It has waited 2,000 years already, and it will keep. For now the river simply runs on where we left it, slow and brown and patient, carrying its silt and its light and its endless quiet down through the sleeping land, exactly where we left it. And you may lie here beside it and let it carry you too, downstream and softly, and down, with no shore you must reach, and no hour you must keep, only the water going by in the dark, and the one small lamp burning steady in the doorway, and the great old land breathing all around you, and rest now and let it go, and drift. And so we drift a little further down the river of years, you and I, past all those long, quiet centuries where Egypt lay so old and so patient that the whole world seemed to lean against it and rest, and we come now to the last golden dusk of the pharaohs, the softest and most amber-coloured evening of them all, and there is no hurry in the coming of it, none at all, for the river runs on exactly where we left it, slow and brown and breathing out toward the sea, and the black fields are still black, and the red desert is still red, and the sun is going down over Kemet as it has always gone down, gilding the tops of the old temples and the palm fronds, and the still backwaters where the herons stand on one leg and think their slow heron thoughts. Let the day set itself down with the sun. There is nothing here to solve and nothing to hold. We are only walking gently into the last age of the old kings. And into this ancient sun-warmed, unhurried land there comes, one autumn, a young man from far across the sea. A young man named Alexander, whom the world would call the Great, and you might imagine that his coming would be a loud thing. All trumpets and dust and armies, but for us tonight let it be quiet. For Egypt did not resist him, and there was no burning, and that is the gentle truth of it. The land had been held for a long while by the far-off Persians, whom we passed in the long evening a moment ago, and when this young Alexander came down out of the north, the old country simply opened to him like a lotus opening on the water, and the people came out to meet him, and the priests came out to meet him, and he was welcomed in, and he went up the river to the great old shrines, and he bowed his head to the old gods as a proper pharaoh should, and the crown of the two lands, the white of the valley and the red of the delta bound together, settled onto one more head, easily, softly, the way it had settled so many thousands of times before. And you may let that ease wash over you now. There was no battle here worth watching, and even if there had been, it was over more than 2,000 years ago, and it has been over ever since, and there is not the slightest need to reach for it tonight. And Alexander walked out one day along the low coast in the north, where the delta meets the sea, and the Mediterranean lies flat and blue and enormous, and he stood on a spit of pale land between the salt water and a soft inland lake. And he looked at the harbour the gods had made there, and he said, "Here, a city." And then he was gone again, away over the far edge of the world on his long roads, and he would not come back alive. But the city stayed, and it took his name, and it was called Alexandria. And it grew there on the shore, in the years after him, like something dreamed, white and gleaming and new. And this is a lovely thing to rest your mind upon, this idea of a city set down deliberately by the sea, its long straight streets laid out with a cord, its wide avenues open to the cool north wind off the water, a Greek city with an Egyptian heart, standing at the very mouth of the oldest river in the world, where all the slow silt of Africa at last lets go into the waves. Picture it if you like, the pale colonnades, the harbour full of masts, the wind smelling of salt and cedar and warm stone, and the great river behind it, patient and unhurried, feeding the sea as it has fed the sea forever. And after Alexander was carried away to his rest, one of his companions, a steady and clever man named Ptolemy, took Egypt for his own to keep, not by burning but simply by staying, and he settled into Alexandria and made himself a pharaoh in the old way, and his sons and grandsons and great-grandsons after him held the land for close to 300 years, and they were called the Ptolemies, the Greek kings of Egypt, and they wore the double crown and took the old titles and raised temples to the old gods in the old style all up and down the river, so that if you walked into their new shrines you would hardly know the world had changed at all, and the priests still shaved their heads and burned the incense, and the scribes still pressed the sacred signs into the stone, and Osiris still ruled his green and gentle afterlife, and Ma'at, the soft feather of balance and truth, still lay at the calm heart of everything. The land was so old that it simply absorbed its newcomers, the way the deep still Nile absorbs a stone dropped into it, with a ring or two of ripples, and then, again, its long smooth quiet. And in that white city by the sea the Ptolemies did a thing so beautiful and so peaceful that it is worth lingering over, here in the dark with your eyes closed, for they gathered up knowledge, all of it, from everywhere, and they built a house to keep it in, and this was the great library of Alexandria, and beside it the museum, the House of the Muses, a place where wise and curious people from every land could come and live and think and read and talk, fed and housed, and left in peace to wander about the world. And into the library they gathered scrolls, thousands upon thousands of scrolls, tens of thousands of them, rolled papyrus stacked in their cool niches, and it was said that every ship that came into the harbour had to lend up its books to be copied, so that the words of the whole world might come to rest here, on this quiet shore, all together. Think of it, softly, as a great warm room full of the murmur of reading, the scratch of reed pens, the smell of papyrus and lamp oil, the poems and the star charts and the maps and the old stories all sleeping side by side on their shelves, kept safe, kept together, waiting. And in the cool halls of the museum beside it, the quiet scholars measured the size of the whole round earth from the shadows of two distant wells, and mapped the moving stars, and drew the coastlines of the sea, and worked at their gentle geometry by lamplight far into the night. And none of it was hurried, and none of it was for war. It was only the slow patient wish to understand, which is one of the kindest things people have ever done. And it happened here, on this soft shore, at the mouth of our old river. It is the same tender thing we have watched all through this long night, the wish to keep, the wish to hold what is precious safe against the dark. Only now it is not a body wrapped in linen, or a treasure sealed in a tomb. It is knowledge itself, gathered in one gentle place by the sea. And there is something in that to make the heart rest easy. And there in that same harbour the Ptolemies raised up one of the wonders of the whole ancient world, a tower of pale stone standing on an island just off the shore, so tall it seemed to hold the sky up. And it was called the Pharos, the great lighthouse of Alexandria, and at its very top a fire burned through every night, tended and fed, and never let go out. And behind the fire a polished mirror threw the light far, far out across the black water, so that sailors many miles from land, out where the sea and the sky are one darkness, could see that single steady flame low on the horizon and know that the harbour was there, and safety was there, and turn their tired ships toward it. And is that not, after all, the very image we began this whole long night with, the small floating flame in the doorway of the reed house at the edge of the Nile, the one warm light out across the dark, only now made tall and white and given to the whole sea, a lamp in a doorway, and a fire on a tower, and all the small lights that all of you have lit tonight out across your own dark, wherever you are lying and listening, near or far. They are all the same light, really. They are all only saying, softly, here rest. You are not alone in the night. And you are not. And you may let that carry you down towards sleep whenever it likes. And now, at the very end of the whole long line of the pharaohs, 3,000 years of them stretching back and back through everything we have walked past, back past Ramesses and the Boy King and Hatshepsut, back past the raising of the Great Pyramids, back to Nama binding the two lands together at the white walls of Memphis in the first grey morning of it all. At the very end of that impossibly long line there comes one last ruler, and her name was Cleopatra, and she was the last of the Ptolemies and the last pharaoh of Egypt, and we may sit with her here for a little while, gently, in the amber of the closing light. And of all her Greek family, all those kings who had held the land for 300 years, and never troubled to learn its speech, she alone, this last one, learned the old Egyptian tongue and spoke it, and she is said to have known many languages besides, and to have loved the ancient country she ruled, its gods and its river and its long deep memory, and to have gone before the old altars as a daughter of the land and not a stranger to it. Let the far-off tangles of her life, the ships and the treaties and the great powers of the world circling her white city, let all of that lie out in the dark where it belongs. For it is over now, long over, and it was over more than 2,000 years ago, and there is not the slightest need to reach for any of it tonight. We need only know that she was the last, the very last, and that she knew she was the last, and that she loved the old land at the ending of it. And in the year we would come to call 30 before the turning of the age, 30 years before the count of years we still keep began, Cleopatra came at last to her rest, and with her the long, long line of the pharaohs came quietly to its close, and Egypt, which had been a kingdom for 3,000 years, which had been old when everyone else was young, passed now into the keeping of Rome, that great new power across the sea, and became a province of a wider world. And you might think that a sad thing, but let us not hold it as a sad thing tonight, for nothing truly ended. The Nile did not stop. The Nile has never once stopped. The flood came the next year exactly as it had always come, laying down its black silt on the fields, and the farmers went out with the water as their grandfathers had, and the priests still swung the incense in the old temples, and the sun god Ra still climbed the eastern sky each dawn and sailed it down each dusk, and Osiris still opened his green and gentle country to everyone who came. The crown was set down, that is all. After 3,000 years and more, the long line of the god-kings laid itself gently down to sleep, the way a very old and very tired person lies down at last, without struggle, without fear, simply ready, and the river ran on over the place where it had been, slow and brown and patient, exactly where it had always run. And so the last pharaoh lays the long line down, and the amber light goes soft and violet over the white city by the sea, and the great fire is lit once more on the tower in the harbour, and the scrolls sleep in their cool niches in the library, and far up the river the old temples darken one by one as the sun goes, and the herons fold themselves away into the reeds. And the first stars come out over Kemet in their thousands, the same stars that watched Narmer and watched the pyramids rise and watched everything we have walked past on our long, slow way down the years. There is no hurry now. There is nothing left to hold. The great line of kings is laid down and resting, and the land of the river is quiet, and the lamp still burns in the doorway of the little reed and mud house at the edge of the Nile, its small flame floating and steady, and out across the dark all your lamps are burning too, near and far, each one a soft yes into the night. Let your shoulders be heavy. Let your breath be slow. Let the great river breathe out toward the sea. And breathe. And breathe. And if you have already begun to drift, that is the whole and entire point, and there is nowhere else to be. Rest now. The story is not quite over, and it will keep, safe and patient in the dark, exactly where we leave it, and we will follow it a little further on when you are ready, and not one moment before. And so we come, you and I, to the last soft turning of the river of years, and there is no hurry in it at all, no sudden ending, only the slow dimming that comes to every long day when the sun has done its work and leans at last toward the far edge of the desert. We have walked so far together, down the whole length of this patient water, from the first black silt laid gleaming on the fields, past the white walls of Memphis and the great stairways of stone reaching up toward Ra, through the calm columns of Karnak and the hidden valley across the river from Thebes, on past the great colossi sitting half-buried and content in the warm sand, and down through the long evening of empires to the last golden dusk of Alexandria by the sea, where Cleopatra, last of the whole long line, laid the crown of the two lands quietly down. And now the light goes lower still, and we do not need to be sad about it, for what comes now is only a long, long sleep, and after the sleep, gently a waking. Let your shoulders settle a little deeper into the warmth of where you are lying. There is nothing left to hold. Let it go. For a while, after the last of the pharaohs, the old ways went on much as they always had, the way a fire keeps its warmth long after the last log has stopped burning bright. Egypt was part of Rome now, and then, in the fullness of centuries, part of a wider world still, and new faiths came softly up the river, and the old gods, who had been worshipped for more than 3,000 years, began at last to grow quiet. It was not a crash, and it was not a battle. Let the battles lie out in the dark, they have been over for thousands of years. It was more like the way voices lower in a great house as the evening deepens, until at last only one lamp is still lit, and then, gently, that one too is carried away. The temples that had stood open for 100 generations, their doorways worn smooth by the feet of countless priests, began one by one to close. The daily offerings grew fewer. The old festivals, when the god had been carried out in his golden boat between the crowds along the water, came round less and less, and then came round no more. And the great stone houses of the gods stood on in the sun, exactly where they had always stood, but the singing inside them fell silent, and the incense no longer rose, and the river went on breathing out toward the sea, slow and patient, as if it had always known that this evening would come, and did not mind. Far up the river, at the very southern edge of the old land, there was an island temple, green and lovely, standing in the water with its columns and its painted walls, the temple of Philae, sacred to Isis, the devoted one, she who had gathered up all the scattered pieces of the story and made them whole again. And it was here, on this last faithful island, that the old worship lingered longest of all, after it had faded everywhere else. The way the last warm light of a day gathers on a single high place after the valleys have already gone to shadow. The priests here still knew the sacred carvings, still knew how to press the old signs into the stone, the birds and the reeds and the eyes and the little seated figures, the hieroglyphs, the sacred writing that Nama's scribes had begun by the river all those thousands of years before. And then, one day, on a wall of that temple, a hand carved the very last of them. The last hieroglyph. The last time in all the long history of the land that anyone, knowing what the signs truly meant, set them into stone with the old reverence. There was no ceremony for it, no one wrote down that it was the last. The hand simply finished, and set down the tool, and the sacred writing, which had spoken for something near to 3,500 years, went quiet. And you need not feel any sorrow reaching for you now, for the signs were not destroyed, they only fell asleep. They stayed exactly where they were, on the walls and the papyrus and the painted coffins, waiting, the way a letter waits sealed in a drawer, patient and unhurried, for the far-off morning when someone would learn again how to read it. And then the knowing of how to read them slipped away. It did not slip away all at once, but slowly, as the last people who could sound out the old signs grew old and were gathered in, and taught no one, and were gathered in, until at last there was no one left in all the world who could look at the little carved birds and reeds and know what they said. The writing was still everywhere, on the great temples, on the tombs, on the obelisks that would one day be carried to far cities, on countless rolls of papyrus lying quiet in the dark, and travellers came and stood before it and marvelled at its beauty. But to every one of them it was only a lovely pattern, a mystery, a thing that plainly meant something once, and now meant nothing anyone could say. For 14 centuries the sacred writing kept its silence. 1,400 years, a stretch of time so long that whole other histories rose and fell inside it, and all that while the names of the pharaohs, and the words of the hymns, and the gentle instructions for the safe journey lay there in plain sight and perfect silence, unread, unheard, waiting, and there is a deep peace in that. If you let yourself feel it, not a loss but a long, patient keeping, the whole ancient voice of a civilization folded up and set carefully aside, safe, unhurried, sure of its morning. For while the writing slept, the land itself was keeping everything else, and here is the gentlest wonder of the whole long night. In the older story we walked together, the story of the 2 rivers far to the east. It was the soft clay that kept the past, baked hard and buried, holding the little wedge marks safe for thousands of years. And here, in the land of the one great river, it is the dry desert sand that is the faithful keeper. For the red land, Deshret, that stretches away on either side of the green, is so dry, so still, so untouched by rain, that things laid down in it simply do not decay the way they would anywhere else in the world. The sand drifts, soft and warm and patient, over the tombs and the temples and the buried towns, and it seals them, and it holds them, and it keeps them. Papyrus that would have crumbled to nothing in a damper land lies in the sand for thousands of years, with the ink still dark upon it. The letters of ordinary people, the lists, the songs, the tender notes. Paint that a single wet winter would have washed away stays bright on the tomb walls, the blues and the golds and the deep warm reds, as fresh as the morning the painter mixed them. The careful keeping of the bodies, the wrapping and the amulets, and the wish to keep them safe for the long journey is kept in turn by the dry, kind sand. And whole sealed chambers, whole houses of eternity with their quiet treasure still inside, wait under the dunes in the dark, undisturbed, unhurried, exactly as they were left. The desert, which looks so empty and so bare, was all that time cradling the past in its arms, and it never once let go. And so, when the morning finally came, there was so much still waiting to be found. It began with a stone. In the north, near the delta where the river spreads to meet the sea, a broken slab of dark rock was found, and on it the same message had been carved 3 times over, in 3 different scripts, one of them the old sacred hieroglyphs, and one of them a later Egyptian hand, and one of them Greek, which men still knew how to read. The Rosetta Stone, it came to be called, and it was a key, though at first no one could quite make it turn. For here at last was the silent writing set side by side with words that could be understood, the same names, the same meaning, waiting patiently to be matched. And there is no need to hurry through the long, careful, wonderful work that followed, the years of study, the comparing and the puzzling, only to come at last to the one who finally, gently, made the lot give way. Jean-Francois Champollion, who had loved the old land since he was a boy, who had taught himself the tongues that were the far descendants of the Egyptian speech, sat with the signs and turned them over and over in his patient mind, until one day, in the year 1822, it all came clear to him at once, the way a thing you have looked at for a long time in the dark comes suddenly and softly into focus, and he understood. He understood how the signs worked, how some stood for sounds and some for things and some for whole ideas, how the little birds and reeds and eyes fitted together into words, into names, into sentences, and the writing that had slept for 1400 years opened its eyes and spoke again. And oh, what it had been keeping to tell us. All at once the silent walls were silent no longer. The names came back first, the long-forgotten names of the kings and queens we have walked past all this night, spoken aloud again for the first time in centuries, Narmer and Djoser and Khufu, Hatshepsut who ruled as Pharaoh, Akhenaten of the single sun and his lovely Nefertiti, Rameses the great sitting patient in his cliff. The hymns came back, the luminous words of the great hymn to the Aten, the tender song to the sun disk that gives life to all things, sung again in the light after so long a quiet. The gentle guidebook for the long journey came back, the book of coming forth by day, which we sometimes call the Book of the Dead, though there is nothing frightening in it at all, only the soft and hopeful instructions for the safe passage into the kind country of Osiris. The green shoot of renewal opened, as we remember to everyone. The love notes came back, and the sick day lists, the small ordinary voices from the workers' village, telling us across the ages that they too had days when they did not feel like going into work, that they too loved and worried and joked and rested. The whole great voice of the land, which we had thought lost, was simply handed back to us, whole and warm, out of the keeping of the sand. And then, in the fullness of it, came the finding we have been waiting for since the very beginning, the one we glimpsed ages ago and set gently aside, far off, and there was not the slightest need to reach for it then. For down in the hidden valley across the river from Thebes, under the drifted sand and the rubble of later ages, one small tomb had slept on, nearly untouched, for more than 3,000 years, the little house of eternity of the boy king Tutankhamun, who had restored the old gods and died so young. All around it the greater tombs had long ago been opened and emptied, but this small one the sand had covered over and hidden and faithfully kept, and when at last it was found and the sealed doorway was opened, there inside, in the still dark, was the boy king's quiet treasure, exactly as it had been laid down, the golden things and the painted things and the careful keeping of the boy himself, gleaming softly as the first light in 3,000 years fell into that patient room. The great keeping had held. The sand had kept its promise. And the boy king, and with him the whole long golden dream of the land of the river, was lifted gently up into the morning, into the light, to be looked at again with wonder and with tenderness, and never to be forgotten any more. And that, you and I, is the whole shape of the night, from the first black silt to the last stone reed again in the sun. The land of the river gave us its gift, and its writing, and its god-kings, and its pyramids, its ordinary quiet days, and its calm idea of Mart, its soft myth of return, its great queen and its hidden tombs, its sun heresy, and its untouched boy king, its great builder and its long, long evening, its last golden city and its last true ruler, and then it laid all of that down to sleep, and let the faithful desert keep it, and woke at last to give it back to us, whole. There is nothing left unfinished. It has all been handed on, gently, from age to age, and now it rests. And so let us go back, one last time, to where we began, for it is still the last blue hour, and there is still the small reed and mud house at the edge of the Nile, and in its doorway the single small oil lamp is still burning, its floating wick a soft and steady point of gold against the coming dark, exactly as it was when we first sat down together at the start of the night. Nothing has been taken from that little scene. The lamp burns on, and out across the great darkness, all the other lamps are burning too, all the marks you and the others left below, each one a small warm light in the night, one here and one far away and one farther still, a whole quiet constellation of listeners scattered across the sleeping world, each one glowing softly in the dark, and none of them alone. And below them all the great river runs on, slow and brown and patient, breathing out toward the sea exactly where we left it, carrying the black land and the red land and the enormous starry sky along with it, unhurried, unbroken, sure of its way. The pyramids stand silent under the same stars, the colossi sit content in the same warm sand, the temples wait, and the writing sleeps and wakes, and the water goes on and on and on, and there is nothing at all now that you need to do, or hold, or reach for. It is all far off, and there is not the slightest need to reach for it now. So let your breath grow long and slow, like the river. Let the last of the day sink away from your shoulders and your jaw and your hands, and let your whole weight settle down soft and heavy into the warmth beneath you. If your eyes have already closed, let them stay closed. If sleep has already come to gather you in, then it has come at the right time, and that is the whole and entire point. The lamp is burning in the doorway. The lamps are burning across the dark. The river is breathing toward the sea. The land of the river is sleeping. And so, now, gently, may you rest. Now, let it go. Drift.